Xbox games past the PlayStation.
Exclusivity walking the plank.
Hello and welcome to Triangle Square, the PlayStation Podcast. I'm your host, Brett Beck, and alongside me each and every week is one Mr. Chris Figs. Chris, how you doing, buddy?
What up, man? Doing good.
Yeah? You in this bitch?
Hell yeah, brother. I'm in this bitch.
You pulled your hood up, tightened the... I mean, I'm trying to figure out, is it like time for your rap album, or is it like cold outside?
Yeah, it's definitely cold. We just had a snowstorm.
All right, let's do a temperature off. I'm pretty sure you're going to win. What's the temperature there today?
Let's find out. Weather. 40 now because it's raining.
Hi, bitch. 39.
Look at you. Weather off. It's supposed to snow in 30 minutes, so.
Yeah, it's still not going to snow.
That'll
probably. They're talking about it potentially snowing on Monday when it's a high of 19 and a low of 11 or some shit like that, which is pretty cold for here. I'm going to be honest. That's not normal.
That's an average day.
I figured as much. That's what happens with you people in the North. It's the price you pay for defying the English and breaking away from Britain, you know?
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah. We pay our own price. We sweat like the depths of hell because the South was part of the Civil War and we defected. So, you know, it's you get what you get.
Yeah, and it's great for us.
Free,
all of our well water tastes like tea.
How sick would that actually be, though?
Depends on the tea.
That's true, but let's just call it like a nice black tea, nothing crazy. You know,
I feel like you get tired of it. You know, if they could cycle the tea,
would.
Like, give me an Earl Grey on Tuesdays, you know?
That would actually make sense.
Friday.
Like, look, guys, to commemorate the Boston Tea Party in the great New England states, we are going to have tea in our water.
Yeah, you have to turn your faucet 3 times and yell the British are coming, and then it becomes tea.
See, there we go. Because I was about to say, the problem with that is you would be bathing yourself in tea.
Yeah, it's got to be like some secret wizard thing, you know? You tap, you pray in the direction of Plymouth Rock, and it's just tea.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I was thinking maybe every house had like an effigy for Paul Revere. Yeah.
Well, that's why we every time we turn on our outside lights for our guests, it's 1, 2, 3, and then we, you know.
Oh, is that really a thing up there?
No. I don't even think I've been saying the right amount of lights.
That totally could. You could make someone who doesn't know the area believe that. Because for a second I was like, that sounds probably not real, but it also sounds like the kind of crazy shit that someone might do just as like, listen, this is our way to honor our country. So who knows? Anyway, guys, welcome to the show. This is, of course, a PlayStation podcast where we talk about games through the lens of being fans of PlayStation. That does not mean that we do not play the other systems. Chris and I both own Switches, Xboxes, and gaming PCs, but we do the vast majority of our gaming on PlayStation and talk about our experiences through that lens. There will be times that we praise and or criticize the opposition, but not for shits and giggles, more because it's what we really think. So with that in mind, we are going to get into the episode. This week we're going to talk about Sony's incredibly well numbers with PlayStation 5 that they revealed at CES, as well as some other things that they talked about during CES. We're going to be talking about some rumors that are circulating that kind of point towards something that a lot of people have thought was coming, and we can find out how real or how dubious we think those claims are, as well as getting a check-in on Metal Gear Solid 3's remake and Silent Hill 2 after we talked about them a little bit in last week's episode where we did our Metacritic draft for 2024, and also going to check in on Hogwarts Legacy, the game that was very much shunned and pushed away during the award season and rose a lot of questions, and we kind of got an idea of how it performed. But we'll get into all that soon. First and foremost, what we always do with the show is check in on what each other have been playing so that we can give you guys an idea of what you might want to play next, or at least give you some insight into something that should or should not be on your radar. Chris, what have you started or what rather did you play this week? Did you finally rein in that ADHD of yours?
I did. I'm playing Yakuza 0 and 0 else. besides Yakuza 0. So
I'm so proud of you. All right, so Yakuza 0 is actually, I kind of want to hear your perspective because I'm assuming you're a lot further than I was into it because it's the only thing you've been playing.
Chapter 6.
Okay, yeah. So you may recall that I played Yakuza Kiwami.
Great game.
And enjoyed it, very much enjoyed it, and immediately went into 0. And I have struggled since I've done that with trying to figure out if I just didn't like Yakuza 0 because it does have some changes that are a little rough to accept coming off of Kiwami because 0 is older than Kiwami. So it's got slightly different presentation, it's pretty similar gameplay wise in all honesty.
It is.
But as with most Yakuza games, it also takes place in the same city. So I am unsure if it's that I didn't like Yakuza 0 or if I was burnt out on Yakuza and needed to take a break between two titles because I actually did a lot of the side content in Kiwami. And that does mean that I spent a good 30 to 50 hours in that city. And I don't think I should have immediately rushed into the next one. But in your experience with it so far, of course, you've been playing the Yakuza games kind of off and on, taking breaks between them. But it sounded like you're talking about kind of straight lining them through in order to play Infinite Wealth. So is that what's on the docket?
That is exactly what's happening. Yeah. I've been a big fan of Yakuza. The one of the first memories of playing games I have is a driving section in Yakuza 2, and so I've been playing them for that long, like since they were on PS2. I fell off the series a little bit in the recent times, but I beat Kiwami. I think I'm like halfway through Yakuza 7. And then I've played the old ones back before I can really remember the beats. So I just decided, fuck it. I'm going to play all of these right in a row and try and platinum them all and see what happens. So we'll see. But yeah, I started with Yakuza 0 and I think it's fantastic. So
it's funny. I remember the first time that I became aware of Yakuza as a series, I knew the name. Like I had seen it here and there, but I never really thought about the game or known anyone who had played it. But back when I worked at GameStop around 2010, one of my coworkers was super into the series, and it was right before Yakuza 4 was coming out for PS3.
Yep.
And he was super stoked for it. And that was the first time I'd ever heard anybody really be like, oh shit, you should be aware of Yakuza. And I never got around to playing it until Kiwami, but it's like one of those things where I became much more aware of. So it was kind of cool seeing that come up and go from what seemed like a niche series in many ways on PS3 to something that feels a lot more like a phenomenon now. And I'm unsure if that's just because the internet makes it easier for people who think alike to find each other, or just because the series has grown. I assume it's a little bit of both.
I think it's a little of both. I think when you really start playing Yakuza, you just see like the weird, funny shit that's in those games.
Oh, of course, yeah.
And there's no games like that in the West. Like you will never play anything from Naughty Dog that comes close to the weirdness of Yakuza.
What I like about Kiwami, or at least what I liked about my time with it, is that sometimes it was so poetic and so poignant. Yeah. And then sometimes it was like, what the fuck am I playing?
Well, I think
there's that time, I'm trying to remember exactly what the context around it was, but there's a bar that Kiryu walks into in Kiwami, and he like punches a statue and like shatters the goddamn thing. Do you remember what I'm talking? It's like a bust.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, it's wild. And it was something simple too, like, oh, the kids can't do so. And you're just like, okay. But it really more than that, like the weird strippers and like weird mini games on some of the strips that you could do. It's a very interesting world.
Well,
but do you not think that you're going to run into some kind of issue playing these back to back to back to back? Like, I'm genuinely unfamiliar with the PS2 and PS3 ones. So,
I don't know. It's definitely possible. I think I'm going to get lucky because my plan is to do 0, Kiwami, Kiwami 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, Judgment, Lost Judgment, 7, Gaiden, and then Infinite Wealth. So after 6, it changes to a different character, different story.
Mhm.
So I think that might give me enough of a break in terms of soap opera Yakuza shit. And then
Yeah.
once that's done, 7 is a turn-based JRPG. So I feel like if I can make it through Yakuza 0 through 6, I'm kind of good.
Okay, so you were talking about Gaiden. Is Gaiden the one that has the sub name of the man who lost his name or whatever?
Yes, yeah,
Okay,
that's
I
a main
thought
line.
so,
Yeah,
but I wanted to be sure. Okay, well, interesting. Why why Judgment beforehand? Just because you're familiar with that play style all the time, or
that's timeline
what?
order.
Oh, really?
Yeah, from what
See,
I looked up,
I knew Judgment was in the same world, but I didn't know how much they actually interconnected with Yakuza so much as.
from what I remember, like it has to do with the Tojo clan and stuff like that. Like there's
Okay,
like you're
so
not.
it's like extra world building for.
Yeah, and it's just part of it. It's funny because I've been watching a lot of Yakuza YouTube, and they all include the Fist of the North Star game as a Yakuza game. You know what I mean? So
Wait, what?
they 100% are like, yeah, number 10 is Fist of the North Star, and I'm like, this it's just buy them. It's not a Yakuza game.
I was about to say, is there any relation outside of the studio?
And I think Kiryu is a unlockable character, and that's about it.
Okay,
It's weird,
interesting.
but I'm not planning on playing that. So, but yeah, I don't know. It's one of these things. Like this could take me. This could be my year, or this could be a project I'm going through for the next 5. I don't know which is going to be. But regardless of anything, I want to play Infinite Wealth so goddamn bad. It looks so good. Like I'm genuinely upset that I didn't pick it because in the fantasy draft, because watching more of it, I'm like, this looks awesome.
Yeah.
Like, have you watched any of it?
For me, I've watched the initial announcement trailer and the first gameplay trailer that they showed.
So
but that's about it.
The thing that absolutely blows me away is it basically has a full Pokemon game in the game. Like it's a Yakuza game, but then I think they call them like Shinjokumon or something crazy. No, that's South Park, isn't it?
Chin Pokemon.
Yeah. They have something that's along those names, and you're just collecting and battling monsters. And I'm like, this is awesome. So I just can't wait. I think it looks awesome. I'm hoping we get more of, I guess I won't spoil anything, but more interactions between characters that you like and you're familiar with. So I'm really looking forward to that. If I do this, I won't get to it until like in a perfect world, like March, but we'll see.
Yeah, that's a long way off, but that's okay. I mean, sometimes I remember the last time that you said, hey, I want to play an entire series, and it was Final Fantasy, and I don't think you even started.
I did. I tried to play Final Fantasy 1. I didn't like it, and I haven't played anything else. So
yeah, that's fair. All right. Well, mine's a little more robust this time around. So I have now both beaten and completely platinumed Avatar Frontiers of Pandora. It's a good game. I still really enjoyed it, but it's just one of those games where Ubisoft has a problem when it comes to platinuming their games, where I feel like their trophy list are almost, it's like they handcraft them to make sure that it shows all of the design failures or all of the cracks in this facade. And it makes you be like, oh, okay, I do like this game, but there's a lot of bullshit involved with interacting with it in this capacity. And it's kind of weird because I feel good about trophy collecting, kind of pushing you to play more of a game and interact with more of the mechanics than you otherwise might. But there's a time where it's like, do I really need to interact with all this shit? The trophy I told you that I was really worried about was it was clan contributions, and man, that was a slog. So unfortunately, it was a Ubisoft game through and through at the very end. It took me probably 50 hours total to platinum it. And I don't regret it. I still really enjoyed the game. But I think that this is a good example of, if the trophy competition wasn't going, I would have let it go.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that's the kind of thing. Like, with like with really that last trophy, I'd have probably been like, man, who knows? I might have pushed through anyway, but it was sure great to have a little motivation of like, this is like a 4,200 point platinum.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
did you finish it in time for last one or for last year's event, or is this your first 24?
No, this is my first one, but about 900 of that 4,200 was on last year's docket.
Got it.
So still, I'm at like a good 3,300 points.
I'm not taking
first game of
anything
the year,
away
which is
from
pretty
it. I'm
solid.
just curious. I was just curious when you got it.
No, this is my first platinum of the year. But Chris,
can we talk about the most exciting game on your list?
I'm going to do my one buffer real quick.
This motherfucker.
I have continued to play Soul Sacrifice and continue to very much enjoy it. I'm going with it because it's the one I'm more familiar with and I wanted to replay it. But it's also an easier platinum and a shorter platinum.
Got it.
So again, looking at the trophy competition as somewhat of a thing. But I've been looking, and apparently everything about Soul Sacrifice, your character and everything, you can transfer directly into Delta. And Delta has got a lot of gameplay mechanics that sound really great, but the platinum takes like 3 times as long on Delta.
Oh, God.
Because there's so much more to interact with. There's more trophies that interact with some of the new mechanics. And I just don't think I want to give myself that kind of commitment right now. So I'm sticking with OG Soul Sacrifice. I'm not following a trophy guy, but I did, because I've already played the game before, decide to look up how long it takes to platinum, and it's roughly 30 to 50 hours. So this is going to be a slow back burner, something I do here and there when I'm watching TV with the wife or we go on a trip, because we were out of town this weekend. So I played a lot of Soul Sacrifice when I was just hanging out, waiting to go to bed when we were visiting family. So, nice. But Chris, being through with my TV being captured by the blue people, the not V, so that you can select my balls. I have finally started a game that you have left here 10 months ago.
Yeah, about that.
Yeah, it was last March, right? That sounds right.
I think so.
So last March, Chris came and he brought with him Wanted Weapons of Fate. And it is a 2008 PS3 game. And let me tell you, man, at times does it feel like it.
Yeah.
But here's the interesting part. I find its age and its general makeup to be very charming because of the time period that it came from. And it's really showing proof that there was something about PS3 games where they were starting to get really interesting production values. Some things in this game look incredible. Some things look terrible, just to throw that out there. But certain things are really cool about the game, and certain things look really good. So you're seeing that kind of move towards high production value. This is actually, I'm about 7 or 8 chapters in right now.
Got it.
So I can tell you with a pretty good certainty that this is one of the more solid licensed games. PS3 was very hit or miss on those, but it was kind of the turning point where there was a bunch of bad ones, but a bunch of ones that were doing something interesting. And yeah, the game is just proof that PS3 devs kind of had a really close balance. I think closer than modern devs often hit, of fun in the way that games have always really been intended to be fun, while also being very over the top and trying to have some kind of movie-like production value and trying to ape the film industry to some degree. I feel like games do that now, but a lot of the times they'll get lost in the minutia of things. And like I was talking about last week with Avatar, there are things in the game where I'm like, I genuinely can't think why anyone thought this was a good idea with the amount of time it took to make that game, at the budget it took to make that game. Some of Wanted's problems are definitely there, but it's also a game that you can tell was made by people who were just really passionate about throwing something together in relation to Wanted. And it's almost obvious that any of the mistakes came from a need of the game has to be out really quickly and we are very budget constrained. Whereas a lot of the times modern games don't feel like the problems are because of budget constraints or time constraints. It just feels like someone thought it would be really cool if we had an ultra detailed thing that no one really wants to do, but we just want to show that we can do it in a game.
Yep.
So very quickly, I found myself when the game is running full speed, full motion, and you're not being caught up with how the loading screens are very obvious corridors where it's like, oh, this is about to transition into a cutscene, so it can transition me into another part of a level, all trying to guise itself together as seamless. There's times where I don't even think about the fact that it's a PS3 game. It's just, it's at a high enough level that you're kind of like, yes, I see this. And it's interesting too, because it's got a really in-depth cover system. So it feels like playing like what I said earlier, because the whole time I was playing it, it's Siphon Filter to the point where like James McAvoy's dad in this even looks like he's trying to be Gabe Logan in multiple parts of the game. But it's like Siphon Filter meets Gears of War.
Yep.
Meets the Wanted series hooks and mechanics. And I think the game is a pretty mediocre third-person shooter, for being honest, up until the point where you start getting all of the actual, like, okay, now we're digging into what makes Wanted different. And dude, bullet curving is incredibly fun. I cannot believe there has not been a first-person shooter studio that's like, bro, maybe we should just take that idea and work it into our game. It is so fun. It's so simple. It has been incredibly interesting, and I'm surprised at how much I enjoy the game for what it is, while being very aware that it's a very old game. So
I'm not fucking surprised. That's all I'm gonna say.
Chris, I gotta say, I expected it to be worse, and that was kind of why I was holding off on it.
Maybe just listen next time, because I'm usually like, at least have some merit to what I say.
You're right. You're right. I'm very curious how I'll feel on a replay of this, because it does require two playthroughs for platinum.
I think you can move a lot faster through it as a replay. I think that's the biggest thing. But have you gotten to points where I'm sure you have, because I think it's a pretty basic part of it, but where you're like curving around columns and shit? That's the coolest part.
Yes.
You can curve it around cover, and it's just like up and down. Oh, it's so fun.
That's been my favorite thing. So it's like suddenly the combat goes from like not quite tight enough third person shooting. Like it doesn't, just as a third person shooter alone, it's kind of sloppy. Yeah. Like it's not super responsive. It's not really. But here's the thing: all of the special mechanics that come as a means of Wanted are so dialed in that I'm pretty sure they were like, it doesn't fucking matter what the third person shooting is, as long as the cool stuff is good. So like whenever you hold R1 to do the bullet curve, it literally locks onto whatever enemy is close enough to where your reticule would be. And as long as they're close enough, you'll see it. And then there's just an arc, and you move the analog stick to arc around, and you'll see if there's anything in your pathway, and you can eventually see it where it's not red. And if you let it go, it'll go. And if you can do it quick enough, or if it's right at the end of something, it'll occasionally, as soon as you fire, it'll go into slow-mo and follow the bullets. And that shit is so cool. Say what you will about Zack Snyder, but the reality is sometimes, at the very least, slow motion can make something that was already going to be cool even cooler.
Yeah, it definitely can. You'll get to points when you're replaying it where you're just like really quick, just tap and flick, and it's so fun. Like that was my favorite part. Is you get really good at it, and you'll just be like bang, bang, bang. It's awesome.
It does actively introduce the problem that anytime you're not playing in a scenario where you have control of normal guns that let you do all your special abilities, even like the one where you can move between cover with the ability to shoot where it slows everything down.
Yeah.
Or even the moments that are almost like railgun moments. It's like it's like the old RE4 moments where mid cutscene, it's letting you interact with shit.
Yeah.
So it's like the ones where you're climbing up through the airplane that's falling to the ground, and you're just like jumping up, and then like it slows down, and you have to shoot a rocket launcher thing and a guy in the head, and you have like 3 seconds to do it in slow-mo. It's cool. Those moments work, even though they can be annoying if you fail them for some reason. It starts to be like, oh, this is too much. Yeah. But the parts where you aren't in control like that, which are few and far between, but like the sniper mission where you're playing as the father is kind of
Yeah,
and I want to talk about something I was running into a lot, and it's confusing me, but I think I may have figured out what to do. But between that and like the moments where you're on like a turret, they're not very fun. they are like a crazy difficulty spike to where like if you pop your head out for 2 seconds, they fuck you up.
Oh, you're dead. Yeah, for sure.
But there's also no way to actually aim before you pop up to start shooting. So like you have to just hope and a prayer and kind of guess where you need to be. But yeah, it's like those moments make me actively be like, oh, why can't I just be running around firing weapons?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
but
I can see
conversely, it makes the normal third person shooting feel like you're building up. You're paying into this more mediocre gameplay so that you can have those couple seconds of fuck, that was cool. You know,
you're investing in boredom for a good time.
Yeah. It's funny that playing that game, I told you I'm not following a trophy. I'm not following any kind of guide for the first playthrough because I have to play it twice anyway. So there's really no point to. Whenever I can just do it all in the next one. But I am actively trying to find collectibles like I do on everything. But it's almost like I'm curious to see how close I'll be on my own, because there's something about PS3 games where I feel like it's hardwired in me of where to look for collectibles. Because I'll see something that's off the side, I'm like, that's clearly where a collectible is going to be stashed away. And then the level starts you somewhere, I'm like, I need to turn around because there's almost always going to be some kind of collectible either in the starting area that you're probably going to move out of too quickly if you're not paying attention, or an area that's hidden behind the starting area for you to go find something. And I have found so much shit. So I am curious. But the problem I was running into before it slips my mind, you know those Defender BT controllers that we had?
I do.
And I just started right before we I played about 10 minutes with the actual DualShock 3 to see. And I hadn't run into it yet, but this is not saying for sure that this is the answer. Throughout the game, I keep having moments where trying to hold L2, which is also an interesting thing. It is a PS3 shooter that does not use L1R1 to primary aim down sight and fire. But when I'm pulling L2 to try and aim down sights, I'd have to almost send you a video, but it's like every now and then it'll just get to this thing where I try and hold L2 and it'll just be like, whoop, 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 like the camera keeps pulling back and forth, like it won't actually lock into it. So I'll see the reticle like flash up for a second and it'll like crazy flicker and come off stream. It'll just keep trying to do that. And I had to like change controllers or turn the controller off, turn it back on, and it would start working again after a while. So I'm curious to see if it does that with the DualShock 3, but I can't think of anything around the Defender BT that would cause that. And I've played plenty of games since I've bought it and not had that issue. So I'm very confused.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I didn't have any good luck with those, so.
Yeah, I know you didn't. But, you know, we were playing Grand Theft Auto 4 for like that whole night. I didn't have a single issue.
Really? That's weird.
Yeah. So I don't know if it's the way that Wanted interacts with the system to access the controls and maybe something's falling apart in there, but I've not experienced it on any other game. Not on Naughty Bear, not on Infamous 2, not on Grand Theft Auto, not on Prince of Persia 2008, whenever I was playing some of it. So I'm very confused. But at least thankfully I do have a DualShock 3 to still use.
Nice. So, yeah, that would be good. That's good.
I thought about going toward using one of those things where you can plug it in and it'll let you use like a PS5 or PS4 controller, but neither of those controllers have pressure sensitive face buttons, which is something that there are PS4 or PS3 games that do use. Not all, but there are some that I don't want to ever run into the situation where I don't have them. And the Defender Bluetooth do have pressure sensitive buttons. So,
okay, nice.
Yeah, unfortunate. So if you're playing PS3, depending on the game, if you're playing any Metal Gear Solid on PS3, there's pressure sensitive button features.
Nice, that's cool. I didn't even know that was a thing.
PS1, PS2, and PS3 all had it. I'm pretty sure PS1. I know PS2 had it for sure. Wow. Yeah, so one of the games that you'll see it in is Metal Gear Solid. I think it's Square on the originals. Metal Gear Solid 2 and 3. Whenever you're aiming, you like lightly touch square and it'll pull up your gun. And then whenever you're ready to fire, you just finish pushing it in. So it's a lot like the triggers on the DualShock or the DualSense, where you can like half step it and it'll have a different functionality. It's just on the face buttons.
Nice. Okay. Yeah. That's cool. I didn't know that.
We were gaming in the future in 2000, you know? So
haptic
unfortunate.
Feedback.
But yeah, Chris, I'm enjoying the game. Thanks for letting me borrow it. Hopefully one of these days I can get it back to you.
Thank you. I'm glad you're playing it. It's about time. And
I'm not committing to platinuming it yet.
No, I'm just glad you're playing it. I'm just glad you're playing it because it's really fun. Like
it is.
It's a very fun 7. That's the thing. Like it's not a masterpiece. I didn't
But it's
send you
way
The
better
Witcher
than I
3,
thought.
but
Yeah.
it is. Of course, it's way better than you
It's
thought.
way
Yeah.
better than a 2008
licensed
game of a movie that didn't really set the world on fire. Like Wanted was culturally relevant, but it didn't just destroy the box office. So,
Exactly.
it's been funny playing it though, because dude, like the Morgan Freeman character model looks awful. He looks like he's got like stung by 1,000 bees. And then James McAvoy does look like James McAvoy, but it's like so weird looking at him. And then like the Anthony Hopkins character, I'm like, I can tell that's him. And I don't know what's going on voice wise. I can't tell if it's actually James McAvoy voicing himself.
I'm 60% sure it is. I'll check.
I think it is because Anthony Hopkins sounded a lot like Anthony Hopkins, but it may just be a really good voice fill in. But then it makes you wonder if all of the actual actors came in, because this is a sequel to the movie, by the way. So this is one of the cooler ideas of a licensed game where it continues the story. So it's not something you're already aware of. If it is all the same actors, why does some of the voice work sound so stilted and fucking weird? If these are professional actors, it's like,
well, it's the same as like Tobey Maguire is awful in the Spider-Man 2 game on PS2, but it's
so
him.
bad.
And
yeah, you're right.
It's dialogue he recorded for the game, so.
Yeah, I don't get it. Maybe it's just removing someone who's a traditional actor from their space, because back then you weren't doing like God of War 2018 or Ragnarok, where you're like, or even Uncharted, where it's like you're acting and voice capturing at the same time. You weren't doing that. Definitely not for a wanted licensed tie-in game.
Yeah, and it was not James McAvoy. It was Jimmy Simpson.
Yeah, I didn't think so. But did Anthony Hopkins, was that really him? I'm always curious, but it's not worth digging too much time into.
I'm assuming if James didn't do it, they definitely didn't get Anthony Hopkins.
Then that makes me wonder how they even managed. I wonder if their contracts for the movie were like, we can use your likeness in any side content that we choose to make.
Yeah, most likely.
Can't believe they got that from Morgan Freeman.
Yeah, I'm surprised they just don't take snippets of movies of like, especially like you're making a Wanted movie. I know it's after and stuff like that, but
which I prefer. But you're right. If it's going to be the same story, you might as well just let all the voice work be from the movie.
Right, exactly. Because there's some parts, right? Never mind. I'm not going to spoil anything for that game.
Yeah, don't spoil anything for my 2008 video game. Chris. Man, we've got a community's take we're going to hop into before we go into the news. So last week, and if you want to be part of the community's take, in case you're new to the show and you hadn't been, every week at the end of an episode, we normally come up with with some kind of a question where we reach out, throw it to you guys, the community, and let y'all throw it back at us and either push back against something we've said or give us some kind of thought on something we talked about in the previous episode, or just give a question to you that was given to us by one of our patrons that we thought was interesting and we want to hear more words on. So you can go over to social media sites and find us there. You can find us on X, formerly Twitter, at Triangle SQRD. You can find us on Facebook in a group called Triangle Squared, a PlayStation podcast. And you can find us in our favorite place, arguably, the Discord, which you can access by clicking the link in the description below, whether you're watching on YouTube or listening on podcast services. And hop in there. We have a dedicated section for that, a channel where we'll ask the question and you can respond. And that is how you get a chance to be read every week on the episode. Now, one thing we always do is we give shout outs to our patrons and try and read their submissions first, but we also like to mix in a few that are not from patrons. With that said, our community's take question this week actually came from one of our patrons, and it was from Josh Ayers, who last week asked us to make 3 predictions for the year. So, of course, we always like to start those off by giving their answer right back. So Josh came back and said his 3 predictions are: Sony London will announce their new IP and it will launch in September. That's a pretty good one, actually. They've been pretty silent. Yep. Nintendo will reveal their new console and it will be called the Super Switch. That would actually not be a bad name convention. It's retro.
It is retro. Way. I saw a name I like way better, but I know they'll never name it this name. It's fantastic. Switcheroo.
1-2 switch.
Nice.
Look, here's the thing. They learned with the Wii U that the name can't be too close. Otherwise, it will confuse consumers. Because regardless of what anyone says, and this was my big contention when Xbox named the new consoles the Series S and the Series X, because I was like, guys, I worked at a game store for years. Consumers get confused over the simplest shit. And yes, we may know, but we are the outliers here. We're talking general public. What do they think? What do they know? And who's buying these things? And there was nothing like seeing people come in and be like, so the Wii U is a controller that you buy for the Wii? Or people who bought Wii U games thinking they would work on the Wii, and all vast sorts of crap. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, so stuff like that is a very reasonable point to be like, hey, maybe you shouldn't call your Xbox One S and your Xbox Series S. They're too close. So I think Nintendo's looking at that. But here's the other thing. They had a really good run of just naming something and then adding something in front of it or directly after it that was more notable than just a letter U. Because like the Nintendo Entertainment System, the Super Nintendo Entertainment System, right? They broke off with the 64 and the Dream and the GameCube, but then you have Game Boy, Game Boy Color, Game Boy Advance,
Game Boy Advance
SP, even though that was technically just more of a Game Boy Advance, and then you had break away from that, and then we got DS.
It was a huge departure, actually. A huge iteration. Yeah.
Oh, it was an iteration, but it still just played Game Boy Advance games.
Sure, but yeah. I think it still fits into what we're saying of
it's a better name than the new Nintendo 3DS.
The foldy clam thing.
Yeah. Oh, trust me. I had to describe to my daughter how when we were playing games as a kid, because he was playing this game called Crossy Road. And I was like, oh, it's this Frogger. And she was like, what? And so I showed her a picture of original Frogger, and she was like, that looks hideous. And I was explaining to her that when I was a kid, when I was her age, we had the Game Boy Color, if you were lucky, or the Game Boy Advance. I think it was actually right around the same time as her age. And I was telling her that it didn't have a backlight. So I'm like, you couldn't play unless you were in a really well-lit room. And you couldn't even play in the sunlight because the sun was so bright that you just still couldn't see what was on the screen. Yeah. And I was like explaining it to her, and the look on her face was just so interesting. But yeah, Nintendo's had a real interesting follow-up with names. The new Nintendo 3DS is a terrible name, and so was Wii U. So,
oh bueno.
Super Switch is fun. I wonder if you run this into the same issue. But Switcheroo is very good. It's just, it's only good for people who can pay attention, because someone's going to be mad. Like, well, why can't my Switch play Switcheroo games?
I just think the funniness of people complaining online, being like, oh, the Switcheroo is broken. It's got stick drift.
Drifteroo.
Yeah.
Stick drifteroo. Okay, his last... Switcheroo. Okay, he has his last one. Hellblade 2 will be delayed to 2025. Don't you put that evil on me, Josh Ayers.
I know. We need more PlayStation games this year.
I'm saying that I have money. Not really. I have my status as a Metacritic draftsman.
Yeah, the loser of the last draft.
So hear me out, Chris. You were talking about your Stanley Cup idea, and then I saw that apparently there's a company called Stanley that makes cups that people freaked out about. I don't really understand.
You want to get a Stanley Cup?
I thought it would be really funny to get a Stanley Cup, and every year, just because I have a graving machine, I can a laser etch at work, and I can put the Triangle Squared logo on it, and I can put yearly draft competition, and I can just every year send it back and forth and add the name of the person.
Well,
it would be the Triangle Squared Stanley Cup.
I like that. We should do that, but we have to just. You'd never be able to use it, right? Like it would only be right? Would you be able to use it at that point? Like how many years of like water and shit can we have in there?
What we could do is not use it, and I could just get a trophy base and drill a hole in the bottom of it and just attach it to the trophy base.
Yes. I like that.
that would work. Yeah,
that's a good
so
idea.
That way it feels like it. So I want to run with that. But okay, moving on to the rest of the community stake we have here. Josh, thank you for the question and for your answer. He's one of our patrons, been so for a long time. We have another patron coming in, Jehudi MD, longtime listener, longtime patron, just like Josh. He says, more shutdown of live service games, which, yeah, I agree.
Name
Bungie
them.
getting... Yeah, that'd be interesting. I'm curious to see which ones he thinks will fall into either. But there's so many. There's so many.
Speaking of live service, I played a little bit of the Apex Final Fantasy VII event. And that is weird.
Yeah. It's an odd choice, but I feel like Apex is like, well, fucking Fortnite's getting away with everything. We got to try.
We'll give a Buster Sword in here.
I mean, I'm surprised that Apex wasn't like, fuck it, can we get Goku?
Right.
But his next one, I think, is a more bold one. So he says Bungie getting folded into PlayStation.
I can see it if Final Shape shits the bed.
I just wonder how that would work and what it would look like. And like, would they just become Bungie a studio, but still fall under that and no longer publish any of their own stuff? Or what would happen? Would they get rebranded? Because that seems like a terrible purchase at that point. Even if they don't do what you want, the Bungie name holds clout. It just does.
Yeah. I feel like if that happens, I mean, I guess we'd have to see how it plays out. Like if the leadership stays there, which you could argue isn't a good thing, you know. It would be interesting to see, but I feel like in my bones that Bungie would end up just kind of dissolving away, you know?
You know, it would be a more wild situation is if yet again Bungie became independent. Like they once again bought themselves out. I don't think they could afford to at this point.
They'd have to pay at this point. They'd have to pay all of that back. I don't know. I guess the way I feel about it is like, think of Bungie as like a bottle of Mio, right? And PlayStation Studios is the water. And I feel like if they end up getting folded in, it'll just be, hey, we're squeezing a little bit of Mio into here, and everyone now got some lemonade. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. But then that comes down to what would be the value in any given team? Maybe not every team. Like shooter teams make sense to throw them out. Any team doing something live service oriented would make sense to kind of throw them in.
To me, I think the most interesting thing for Bungie would be, hey, we've got XDev. You guys are the FPS XDev.
That would actually be pretty cool.
You can make your own games, but hey, I don't remember the studio, but the guys behind Immortals of Avium are looking to make their new game. We're going to put them in contact with you guys, and they're making a Sony first-person shooter while you guys are working on Marathon, and you're helping them out. I think that would be a really cool way to utilize Bungie. So we'll see.
Yeah, because, you know, that as weird as it is, I wouldn't be surprised if part of the Microsoft acquisition is that any shooter game that Xbox has is like, hey, we're going to kind of run this through a focus group of people who are part of Call of Duty, because like that game does just have great feel. Yeah. It's like one of the most universally praised things about the series. So his final one is one that is not too bold, but also you hope not, considering the games they have coming this year. Square Enix not hitting their target for the year financially. And of course, he put "there" in parentheses to imply that they always ask too much of everything. But I struggle with that because as a company, Square Enix has a history of saying that nothing that they make ever performs to expectation. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, they should be aiming high as shit as a company that's aim is to make money. So
yeah. Well, you know, you get to a point where nothing can meet your expectations, and then you sell your studios to Embracer. You know what I mean? So it's you do. I feel like you do need to kind of not. I'm not saying Square Enix leadership is wrong, but if you're not hitting the targets you're setting, then yeah, I guess.
Well, you need to start scaling your targets back and start scaling your budgets back accordingly.
Well, exactly. Like if Tomb Raider is disappointing, selling 10 million copies, you fucked something up.
Yeah.
You spent too much or whatever it is, you know?
Yeah, well, and you know, we were talking about that ironically at work today on a little bit of break. I went out to the shipping dock, and we were talking to those guys, and we brought up how Square Enix had sold some of their things and about their crazy expectations. And it started crossing my mind because they were like, well, they haven't closed much of their Japanese output. And I almost wonder, is it cheaper, generally speaking, for them to work with Japanese studios and the games don't need to hit nearly as much than it is? Because I was talking about how a lot of Western studios, just by nature of where they are very expensive to run because of minimum wage and all sorts of things that come into play for the area that they're in. Now, conversely, there are some studios that benefit from that a lot. Like Blue Point not only has a low number of employees, but they also are in Austin. And Austin, Texas, in comparison to a lot of the places around here, is a very cheap place to live and has a very reasonable cost of living. Therefore, you don't have to pay your employees at that location nearly as much as you do someone who's like in the middle of, California. So you kind of come around to that. And it's like sometimes games are just cheaper to be made at certain places.
Yeah. I mean, they definitely are cheaper because you look at Godzilla -1, right? And a lot of the conversation around that game was, the Marvels, the movie. Yes, sorry. Oh, the Marvels tossed $250 billion and it looks like this. And Godzilla -1 cost $50 million. And then you hear some of the like whispers of like, well, it costs $50 million because they don't pay anybody and they have to work 100 hours a week, so it's definitely a different culture around work, but it's also a different culture in general. So they're definitely cheaper. If that's the case and that translates to video games, it's definitely cheaper to make them in Japan. And that's probably why they were so upset, right? It's like, yeah, you sold 10 million units, but guys, we're paying all of you $100,000. This isn't working. We're in Japan. It's like, oh, there's suicide nets outside the buildings in some of those places. That's obviously actually more China and Foxconn, but you get what I'm trying to say anyway.
Yeah, I understand. I mean, just the reality of different work cultures bring with it different expectations and different costs that coincide with those expectations. We're going to hop in with one from a one-armed wolf. I feel like we haven't done him in a while. We have a lot of answers, so we're not trying. We haven't. We're not trying to avoid anyone, but we can only answer so many. So while we got a lot of answers from a lot of people that we hear from often, we appreciate them. But we're going to do a couple more. So a one-armed wolf says, 1, Sony buys Square Enix or CD Projekt Red. That's bold. That's bold. It's possible.
Especially since they just said we don't want to be bought.
Yeah. Embracer closes or sells off 50% of the 1 million studios they have. I'm going to kind of edge in there and say that Embracer sells Crystal Dynamics to Microsoft.
Yeah.
It almost seems like that's just what it is now. And then I think Microsoft may even just close whatever that new studio name even is. I can't even recall the one that was supposed to be making the quadruple A game.
The Initiative.
That kind of blew up. Was it The Initiative? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, so I could see that shuttering and that entire Perfect Dark reboot just going to Crystal Dynamics.
That would be interesting. It would be a hell of a move for Sony to buy Crystal at this point.
That would be wild. Yeah. I don't know how that would even work at this point, but it would be really interesting.
Well, they'd finish Perfect Dark and then they'd go make Uncharted 5.
Well, here, if we're being honest, though, let's just think for a second. If Microsoft is banking so much of their game from the Initiative on the fact that Crystal Dynamics is helping them, do you really think that Microsoft is going to let Sony outbid them no matter what? That's the kind of thing. No. This feels like the obvious one where even if it was starting, it would have to be something that Microsoft had absolutely zero clue about and never got clued in on. And somehow Sony was able to offer them money and enough to where they didn't feel like maybe we could get more out of Microsoft.
Yeah, but no, never mind. I'm wrong. My timeline was off, so it doesn't matter. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely not likely, but it would be very funny. Because also think of the trajectory, right? Crystal Dynamics makes a Tomb Raider inspired by Uncharted. They get bought by Sony and they make a Uncharted 5 game. That would be a hell of a thing to do. And that would be great. They make
Uncharted inspired by Tomb Raider?
Well, yeah, I mean.
And the cycle continues again?
Then a new Amazon studio makes a Tomb Raider inspired by Uncharted that was inspired by Tomb Raider that was inspired by Uncharted that was inspired by Tomb Raider.
Yeah, let's just keep going. All right, last one. He says, pie in the sky, it won't happen, but fuck it. Xbox brings Game Pass to PS5 with limited games. We're going to talk a bit later in the episode about whether or not that is as crazy as an idea as it may have sounded to some people. And this is something we've been talking about off and on the show for a long time.
Yeah.
So it'll be fun to kind of get back into that once we get into the news. All right. We're going to do one from Duh Overlord, who says a new PlayStation showcase. And also, let me give a second. Duh, I don't think we've heard from you. So thank you, first and foremost, for joining the Discord and for sending in your responses. So he says a new PS showcase level event, which is needed, in my opinion, quite clearly.
I like that there's a government classification for a Sony event.
A showcase
Mr.
level.
President, we've got a showcase level event.
Threat level showcase.
He's got to stop reading children's books, and he's like, oh, the event is at the tower.
I don't know. I don't know why you bringing that up made me think of the moment in Scary Movie 3 whenever the Girl Scouts or whatever are up there, and like the president is the dude from the Naked Gun, and he just starts freaking out and everything, and then he's over there and he's like, what do you have in there? And he's like waiting for his security guard to tell him something. He's like, oh, nothing, sir, just bumping some old Tupac. And then you see a second later, it's like he puts the headphone in, he's like, this shit is popping. Leslie Nielsen, I think is his name.
Yes.
That guy was hilarious, quite funny. All right, so he says, yeah, rip. 2, Nintendo will announce new IP. Bold. And I'm curious to see this because as we went through last week, so much of their games this year that they have announced, which is quite a bit actually, they have plenty of output. A lot of them are remasters of legacy titles or new party titles, kind of like the Mario versus Donkey Kong and Peach's shake-up game or whatever she's doing. So when you look at it that way, these seem like end-of-life games to where the whole point is we're going to announce something big with the Switch 2. I'm curious to see what it is.
Yeah.
But I'm not holding my breath. It's a bold one because I could see the necessity for it. But when's the last time we actually saw genuinely new IP from Nintendo, even on the Switch? It's been a while.
Last generation, though. It was ARMS and Splatoon.
Well, I know, but I'm saying on Switch, it's been a while.
Oh, sure. Fair.
Yeah, because like they had a couple... I would struggle to call this their IP, but they technically own it at this point. They bought it out. My favorite game, Astral Chain, that has been on Switch. It's my favorite game I played on Switch. Was new IP and for their system and exclusive, and they now own the rights to it. That Platinum did, but they've not done anything else with it since. And it's just kind of been a weird thing. They've really relied on how strong their IP is lately. Metroid Dread, of course, the ever-looming Metroid Prime 4, the Metroid Remastered, all the Zelda games that have come on Switch, which is only 2 realistically from them. But even leaning into that IP with third-party support, like when they did the Dynasty Warriors style games with them, where it was Hyrule Warriors. So when you look at all those things, they have leaned very heavily. Pikmin 4 came back around as a new Pikmin title. There was, of course, Animal Crossing. So Switch was by and large legacy IP that managed to continue to grow and get bigger than they've ever been. So it's high time for them to announce new IP, but it doesn't necessarily mean I'm confident they'll do it. So I like the prediction, though. It's pretty good. And then his last one, he says, my forever pipe dream, a new Jack and Daxter game. And with that, I have a question for you, Duh Overlord. Who is the developer? Is it Naughty Dog?
No.
And if it's Naughty Dog, do you believe that modern day Naughty Dog could even do that series justice for what you wanted and liked out of it? I think some people do agree that would be okay and they would do a good job with it and they like how Naughty Dog has changed. But I think other people feel like they like Naughty Dog for what they've become, but they don't see how their modern game design could play into a Jack story very well. You kind of had a moment there, Chris. What do you think about it?
I mean this with all due respect to Jack and Daxter. Naughty Dog spending 3 to 5 years making a Jack and Daxter game would be the biggest waste of time I could possibly think of. Give that to any other team. I'm not saying don't make Jak and Daxter, but could you imagine after The Last of Us 3, you get an announcement of a Jak and Daxter game from Naughty Dog? I'm sorry, that would not.
It'd be wild. It'd be really cool, but I don't see it happening either.
Would it be cool though?
I mean, yes, but here's the thing: it would be cool, but there would always be this sense of what is this IP 20 years later? What is this IP to them 20 years later? How are they going to change it? Is it going to change in a way I'm familiar with? But I think the initial excitement of seeing Naughty Dog hit the screen and then Jak would be like, whoa, shit.
Well, sure. That, of course, that would be great. But the opportunity cost of one of the premier studios in this games industry making a 3D mascot platformer for 5 years would be just asinine use of money. I'm not saying don't bring Jak back. Don't have Naughty Dog bring it back. Give it to a Sobi or Sobo, whatever their name is.
I don't know how many Jak games you played. Mm-hmm. So I don't really know how familiar with the gameplay you are after Jak 1. I just say that generally speaking. So for everyone that is not aware, Jak 1 is very much a platformer. I mean, arguably an action platformer, but it's very platform heavy, and you can see a lot more of the Crash DNA in it, even though it's open world. 2 was just like, fuck it. Now we're just like a more animated take on Grand Theft Auto with Dark Jak and all this different stuff, and you can fly around in cars, and it's wild how much it changed. And then 3 is just like a gritty shooter, like Mad Max in the Jak universe. And then it was Jak X car combat racing, where it was just racing. It was basically a kart racer hidden under the fact that it was way more brutal. It was like if Twisted Metal was actually a racing game that you could also blow your enemies up in. So the trajectory of that series, all I'm really getting at there is that series became much more like modern Naughty Dog as the series even progressed. I think it was kind of the linchpin for how they ended up at a game like Uncharted. And then really, I think you can see even more of that dark grittiness where you look at in The Last of Us, when you look at the absence of Amy Hennig as a buffer, and to some degree, even Uncharted 4 when you didn't have Amy Hennig.
And Bruce.
And Bruce, you're right. But across the board, I think that you see there's more of a connection than is immediately obvious, but it's still a weird thing to think. How do they go back to a series like that? But I have a surprise candidate for that game if they ever decide to do it that I don't know that they would, nor do I even know if Sony feels like there's a need for this. But if you were going to do a new Jak and Daxter game, I think Ember Labs.
Yeah, I could see that. That would be cool.
Kena, I think, shares enough DNA with old mascot action platformers, but it also was difficult often. And it had a surprisingly in-depth combat. Mm-hmm. And I think if you kind of take that and kind of go back to the Jak world where you do have some established grittiness, but you still want platforming and you still want action and you still want actual combat that's kind of grueling, I think they might be able to balance that out. And I also think they have the right kind of art direction for a game like that. So
yeah, I mean, I could see it.
But I'd be curious to hear from you, Duh Overlord, whether or not you are willing to have another studio work on it, and if so, who that studio is. Because a good example is like Sanzaru Games messing with messing with Sly Cooper, and not everyone was on board for that. I quite enjoyed it, but I understand why some people were like, no, because inherently it's new people who look at the series through a different lens and have a different view of what it was, and what it is to them. So.
Absolutely. I don't know. Again, nothing wrong with the series. I just think that would be a big step back for them.
Yeah. I mean, stranger things have happened.
Unless you told me this was like a 10-person Skunkworks team while everyone else was doing The Last of Us 3 and whatever their new IP is. Otherwise, I'd be like, this was yikes.
I don't know. The fact that they still the fact that Insomniac has still been cranking out Ratchet and Clank games, I think says that Sony has a want for that part of the industry to get recognized, as long as they actually feel like it can recover the money's put into it.
Is it that, or is Insomniac getting to do Ratchet because they don't want to be a Marvel studio, but they have to acknowledge that's how they make their money, and Sony has to keep them happy So like you have to make these Marvel games, you get one Ratchet, then we're going back to Marvel because Ratchet's not going to make us the same money as X-Men cross Spider-Man or whatever the hell they do.
Maybe you're correct, but the fact that we got a Ratchet on PS4 and we've not seen Jak and Daxter at all since PS2, I think says something about the differences between what Sony's willing to let. I think Sony's willing to let them work on a Jak and Daxter. I do genuinely think that. That doesn't mean Sony's going to greenlight it after a certain period, but I think Sony would be allowed, would be like, okay, Naughty Dog, if you want to make Jak and Daxter, do a conceptual phase. Let's talk about what you think it is. Maybe even give you enough to kind of build up a quick gameplay slice demo to kind of explain what you want to do with the game, and then we'll go from there. I'd be curious to see. But the fact that it gets talked about as often as it does by anyone at Naughty Dog does seem interesting to me. But it's worth noting that almost every time it's talked about, it's kind of talked about with this thing of like, is there any new stories for us to even tell in that world? And is it worth going back to? And if we go back to it, it has to feel like it has a purpose and not just because fans wanted it. So you have to strike that kind of balance.
Yeah, I don't disagree.
Yeah. Well, Chris, how about we wrap that up and call that the end of the community's take? Thank you to everyone who chimed in and gave us your thoughts. I think there's some pretty interesting predictions there, and it'll be curious to see if any of them come true. So we're going to move into the news, and as we do, I want to remind everyone, if you listen to the show and you enjoy it and you think that it is worth anyone else's time, please consider, if you're on a podcast service, giving the show a review or a rating. If it allows you to review and give a little more insight on what you do and don't like about the show, that'd be great. And remember, we have timestamps for you so that you can listen only to what you think drives your interest and not have to spend time on something that doesn't necessarily pull you in. Those were a great suggestion that we got as a means of reviews, and we've been glad to offer them in. So hopefully you enjoy those. But as we get into the news, the first piece here is pretty good news for Sony. They have announced huge numbers for its PlayStation 5 console. At CES, Sony announced that they have 123 million monthly active users on the family of consoles. This is in addition to the announcement that 50 million PS5 consoles have been sold. The PS4 reached this number just a week faster than the PS5 did, but given the environment the PS5 released into, as we all know, that number is insanely impressive, definitely considering how hard it was for them to even meet demand initially, and the fact that they've only recently been able to really keep that demand where it needs to be. Sony still plans on shipping 25 million units in this fiscal year, ending in March 2024, if they are going to hit their marks. So be really curious to see if that 3-month period can kind of pull that off. But either way, very impressive. During CES, Sony also showed a glimpse of a Gravity Rush movie, as well as updates on the Horizon and God of War series that are coming up, as they kind of did a little dive into their PlayStation Productions side. So, a lot to unpack there. First and foremost, 123 million active monthly users. Doesn't necessarily mean PlayStation Plus users, but that is a very good number, and one that any company in this market would be hard pressed to scoff at.
You know what it also includes, which I think is the most interesting part, is 6 million PlayStation 3 users.
Yeah, I thought that was wild, but in a good way. Like, hell yeah. Because technically, I am one of those.
Yep, me too.
Though I'm curious, how many of those are strictly PS3 users?
Yeah, I'm not sure about that one.
That's genuine curiosity. That's pretty incredible. The 50 million PS5s, considering that the first 2 to 3 years of the system's lifespan were rife with issues and trying to even get them onto store shelves, I think this is an incredible achievement. And I think it's really interesting that I remember now part of where the conversation was going, at least whenever I talked about it being at work. One of the people out there had said something about, they talked about PS3 having no games or whatever. And I thought, it's interesting. Anybody that said PS3 has no games only remembers like the first year and a half or 2 years of PS3, because after that, PS3 had so many fucking games.
Bangers, dude.
Bangers, too. Yeah, just left and right. So many good games. Plenty of which I've literally never even played. That should be enough to tell you. But, he made a kind of a follow-up joke, which I think rang a little more true, because, the heart of all humor is that there was an element of truth to it.
Mhm.
And he was saying, unlike the PS5, which really doesn't have any games, and I clearly don't agree that the PS5 has no games, but I have been surprised with how low the output has been in comparison to even PS4, to even PS3, which is not too much surprise from PS3 side because games didn't take 5 years to be made. But it's the reality of where we are. There's more games than ever, but there's less exclusives than ever, it feels like. That's the best way I can describe it. So if you liked PlayStation for all these years because of what you can only play on their system, there's seemingly been less of that. Maybe that's just an optics thing because of how much releases that contextually it feels like so little. But I don't know. I'd be kind of curious to see if that can be dissected and if there really isn't a insane difference, and rather it's just the context of the gaming that's releasing around it makes it feel like too little of that is PlayStation only. Not that it has to be. It's just what we're kind of used to as a longtime player. So, Chris, did you see the little glimpse of the Gravity Rush movie? It looks weird.
Yeah, was that
I'm not sure if it's live action, or if it was like a CG previs to show what they kind of want to do with the movie.
I thought it was that. I thought it was CG. Like, this is the look we're going for. Maybe it's an animated movie, and that would be the best way to do it.
I think so too, but I'm curious if Sony's bold enough to try animated stuff. And we have a question that kind of goes along with this part of it. So I actually want to move into that real quick.
Okay, move in.
But while I'm doing that, how likely do you think we are for PlayStation to actually hit that 25 million in these first quarter of this year?
I'm not going to put anything past Jim Ryan in his final days.
Be kind of wild, but it is certainly possible. So we'll just have to see what ends up happening. So let's see what we have here. It was from Josh Ayers, one of our patrons. He says, now that we have seen some PS movies and shows, which we have, release, is there any IP you want to see adapted that has not been announced yet? And, we joked the other day, Josh and I, whenever he actually posted about CES and about that little clip. And I thought, yeah, it's a really interesting way to go. And Gravity Rush is not an obvious movie candidate for me on the IP scale. I'm a little surprised they're going for it, but I'm also glad to see it. It's a very Japanese IP. It's
an obvious anime. And I know, like, there's like that little tinge of, oh, it's Japanese, so you want them to be an anime. But, like, I can only envision something like that being animated. Like, what do I want to watch? I don't know. The girl who plays Betsy Brandt in Spider-Man play a cat. Like, I don't want to see that movie.
I just don't know. I think a lot of the Japanese games that kind of get looked at in this thing are also very long games, and that's becoming true of gaming as a whole now. So it's a little harder for that to be the main. Not even critique, but just point where you go, how viable is that, trying to shrink that into a 2-hour or so movie? But I think a lot of it is that the charm and the design was clearly made with the intent to be very anime-like and anime-driven. And if you think about the way that cutscenes played out in something like Gravity Rush, do they have to play out that way? No, but that's part of the charm of the IP. And they play out with like little comic blocks where the characters break through sometimes, and they're often not voice acted, and there's like text bubbles and all sorts of things. And you kind of look at it and you're like, that is a lot of the makeup of the IP. And I think that you get to that point where some people were worried, like whenever Scarlett Johansson's live action take on Ghost in the Shell. And it's like, I don't have a comment on that movie because I own it, but I've yet to watch it. I need to. I don't know how much it deviated or how much it felt like its IP that it was in relation to. But sometimes certain things just don't translate well into live action. And I feel like this is one of them. I kind of thought it would never happen. But I thought it would be really cool for Sony to use this as a way to leverage other studios and do cool collaborations. And since Sony has gotten with Level 5 and made a Level 5/Studio Ghibli game, I thought it'd be really cool to have Studio Ghibli be like, hey, do you want to make an animated Studio Ghibli Gravity Rush movie? That would be sick.
Dude.
But I don't think it would ever happen. But I think it would be very cool.
God, no. I couldn't see Miyazaki, one of Miyazaki's last movies, being a Sony IP. Definitely not Gravity Rush.
but every movie he makes is supposed to be his last one. So hey, you know what? Balls out to the man. I'll give it to him, because if you're going to sit there and be in this industry, you probably need to treat every single thing that you do as if this is going to be your final work.
Oh yeah.
And if so, you're going to more than likely get banger after banger after banger after banger. The only movie from Ghibli that I've seen kind of get reviews was the one movie that came out a few years back that Miyazaki did not direct.
Yeah. He's the GOAT.
But the new one, The Boy and the Heron or whatever, has gotten incredible reviews.
I want to see
it.
And
it looks
so bad.
Incredible. Yeah. So, but I would love to see that. I even think it somewhat stylistically fits into the way that they portray worlds, you know?
Yeah, they should do. I started this as a joke, but it would actually be really sick. They can go two ways with it: a Resistance or a Killzone movie done by Ghibli that's just Grave of the Fireflies in those universes.
Yeah, and here's the thing: if you didn't give it to Ghibli, someone would be like, "You're just ripping Ghibli off." If you give it to Ghibli, be like, "Oh, it's self-referential." Yeah, that sounds a lot more like a joke, but that would be kind of interesting to see.
Yeah.
So who knows?
Plate of the Hellgast.
Right. So going back to the heart of the question, is there an IP that you want to see adapted that has not been announced yet? I have a weird in-between answer, but I want to hear yours before I go.
Are we sticking with Sony?
I mean, I think in the spirit of the question, it's trying to be that. But if you want to broaden it out to games as a whole, I mean, gaming is in general is definitely hitting the movie and TV sphere hard.
I'll give you two weird ones that will not happen. Okay, Sony, right? This is a Sony exclusive. Give me a Tokyo Jungle movie.
Interesting. Okay.
All animals. Fucking awesome. That would be sick. Like, what's that one where the dog, the cat, and like the goat cross America? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Are you talking about Homeward Bound?
Yes.
It's not a goat, but okay.
I couldn't remember. My
two dogs and a cat, voiced by Sally Field.
My second one would be Tom Cruise led. This would be very important, and it would be Alpha Protocol.
Okay,
give me a big budget spy movie.
Okay, I have a weird one. It's not my go-to one, but because I feel like my first answer is a bit more of a cheat in technicality's sake, then I'm going to give another one. No. So this has technically been announced before and then just continuously died, and it was done so long ago that I think it's worth saying that they've not re-announced it as part of anything in relation to PlayStation Productions. I cannot believe that Sly Cooper has not been turned into an animated film series or something. Because I'm going to be honest, of all of the PlayStation mascots, Ratchet, Jack, all the PS2 ones, Sly Cooper is the most universal. He's the most generically family friendly. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean that in a good way. I think he's got good pull. The cast of characters is really unique. And I think it's something that kids would really drive into and adults would really like, because it's kind of like making your spy thriller heist movies and then also just doing it as a child's movie in a way and kind of bridging that gap. And I don't know why they didn't do that. And I've always thought it was weird that Sony had this IP that was so obviously able to be something that could cross the genre lines, and they just never did. And then when they finally announced it and did that little trailer back in like 2013 or whatever it was, I was like, awesome, they're finally doing it. It's such a good idea. And it's just been dead in the water. I don't know why they've not been able to get that off the ground. And it may be too late now, maybe not, but I just feel like they have had 20 years of this character that they could have done this with, and they never really moved the needle on it at all. And the one time that they tried it with anyone, it was with Ratchet and Clank, and it was literally just the game as a movie. Come on.
They announced 200 episodes of a Ratchet show too, right? No, it was Sly. Wasn't it Sly?
It was. They announced that they were going to do a Sly show, and they put out actually it was going to be a Sly movie. Then a couple years later, it was like, well, we're still going to do Sly, but it's going to be a TV show, and that's the last we've heard of it, and it's nothing to show for it.
And didn't they sign like 200 episodes of the thing?
I don't think so, but they may have, and I'm just not familiar with it. Let's see. Sly Cooper TV series, 200 episodes. I mean, I don't know. Let's kind of do something to that degree. Yeah, in 2018, July 2018, the official website for the series was updated with a release date of October 2019 for the first half of season 1.
Wow.
Never happened. So it was going to be called Sly Cooper: Rise of the Legendary Thief.
Sounds
And
like
that's not even the original one that was going to be.
Sounds like a Disney show, honestly.
No, hold on. This is a fan series. This is not the actual thing. Interesting.
Oh, what's your next?
So the
IP?
actual one never had an actual name.
Gotcha.
But, yep. The series was first announced in June 2017. So that was after they went from being a movie into that. It was going to be 52 episodes.
Gotcha. Cool, man.
Unfortunately, that doesn't matter. So it never came. But my less cheated answer, something that they've definitely not talked about, is if they're willing to dig into the IP graveyard and dig out something that I love and was very beloved but didn't sell necessarily very well in the terms of Gravity Rush, I think that I'd like to see them let Guillermo del Toro make a puppeteer movie.
Ooh, that would be
where he does it in a similar way to how he did his Pinocchio movie, where it's like stop motion or any kind of interesting animation style that could fit into that. And it would kind of tie in because, you did Pinocchio and in Puppeteer, you're a puppet. I just think it'd be really cool. And I like Guillermo del Toro. So
that would be fantastic.
And they've worked with him because of Kojima. So
hear me out. Guillermo del Toro makes a PT movie.
They'd have to buy it from Konami, but
might as well. What are they doing with it?
Hell, Konami make the movie. Why not at this point? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Anyway, good question. I thought that one was pretty fun. So I'm still really curious, but I'd say this, Chris. After The Last of Us, which is a show I didn't watch because I didn't need to, or I didn't feel the need to, but obvious quality, which is good. The Uncharted movie did well, even though I don't think it was terrible. I just don't think it was great. But it did well, so it didn't really matter. And on the TV side of things, I think Gran Turismo did pretty well. Mostly great words around it. They seem to be on a pretty solid trajectory. So after Twisted Metal, a lot of the fears I had over some of the TV shows kind of left me. But I am keeping a little bit of a wall up because Twisted Metal didn't have as obvious of an adaptation point, which I think led to them doing something original, which I enjoyed. I think Horizon and God of War are going to very closely mimic their source material. And I think that will be good for people who want to see that happen again and draw in new fans. And it'll do the same thing where my mom will be like, have you heard of this God of War thing?
Yes, Mom.
But unfortunately for me, I don't yet feel confident in that those are going to be shows that are necessarily made with my proclivities in mind, which is fine. I mean, not everything has to be made for me. It's just, it's not overtly obvious yet how Sony approaches adapting IP yet.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I thought it was interesting that they called it Horizon Zero Dawn.
Yeah. Which I think that's kind of where I was like, I think it tells me where they're wanting to go with it. But that kind of seems wild because why are you giving a TV series a surname?
Well, I think what it's telling you is it's going to be the same as the game. Like that's the story they're telling.
Yeah, for sure. But then what happens if it's a breakaway success? Is season 2 going to have a surname, or is it just going to still just be called Horizon Zero Dawn and they're just going to continue into telling the story of Forbidden West? You know what I mean?
I do.
It's a bold choice. I would have thought they would have just called it Horizon, but maybe the IP that they own can't be Horizon because it's too generic of a name, so it has to be Horizon Zero Dawn. But it seems unlikely considering that the second game is called Forbidden West, but not impossible. We did have The Fast and the Furious, Too Fast, Too Furious, The Fast and the Furious Tokyo Drift, Fast and Furious, Fast 5,
Fast 7,
Fast and Furious 6,
Fast X,
Fast 7. Oh, no, sorry. Was it Furious 7 and then Fate of the 8?
That's the worst one. I hate that one.
So my point being is apparently intellectual property is not inherently tied down to a name.
No.
So We'll see. Otherwise, Paramount would be fucked. So we're going to keep moving on. The next piece of news here, as Chris chose to write in a very interesting tone, he says, prophecy foretold on this show is looking to be coming to pass. According to many reliable leakers and industry insiders, Xbox is moving some of their back catalog to different consoles. The consensus seems to be that Hi-Fi Rush, the indie-style darling from Tango Gameworks, and Rare's 2018 Games as a Service title, Sea of Thieves, are going to be making their way to PS5. There's no confirmation and just what leakers and outlets are hearing, but biggest among the voices echoing the sentiment is Jeff Grubb, Steven Totilo, and even Xbox Echo Chamber Windows Central are both reporting the shifting of the tides. That's nice. This is kind of what we're talking about with this idea that Game Pass won't come to PlayStation, and maybe it won't. I still feel like the incentive on PlayStation side is still too small for them. So I'd be curious to see what would have to happen on Microsoft side to move the needle enough. But regardless, there does seem to be some inclination here, of course, that games could be coming over. But I think even if you want to look at this as a rumor, if you want to try and back it up with anything else to see how potentially true it is, Ori and the Blind Forest and the follow-up game are both on Switch. Yep. As Dusk Falls is on PlayStation 5 right now.
As is Scorn, Minecraft, Immortality is coming.
There are a lot of games that are exclusive or that were made as part of Xbox Game Studios that are already on other consoles. This is not without precedent. So with that in mind, I don't think that this is as crazy. Hi-Fi Rush had a very limited audience on Xbox. I think they were aware of that. And I think moving that, honestly, the initial rumors said it was going to be PS5 and Switch. And if I'm going to be honest, Switch might have had to get killed because it couldn't run the game solidly enough, because as a rhythm game, it needs to be higher frame rate in order to be more precise. I think that if they could have, Switch is actually probably the ideal system for the type of game Hi-Fi Rush is. But if nothing else, PlayStation has, again, a small niche for this, but that niche is on a much bigger user base, and therefore the game can get a lot more recognition and a lot more recoupment of investment. It is what it is. I think it's a smart choice. But that one's a little less obvious than Sea of Thieves, which I think is a very obvious choice. The game's been out. It's enjoyed its exclusivity, and it's a games as a service title that can only stand to benefit from being on as many things as possible. Mm-hmm. And since Xbox has already broken that seal so many times, why not do it with this one? You can argue the same way. Why would Sony not do it with any of their games as a service titles? But there's something to be said about the fact that it seems like Sony is releasing all of their games as a service titles on PC day one. So they understand that isolating them to a single environment is not ideal. So with that in mind, I think that this sounds fairly plausible. Where are you at on this, Chris? I mean, we've talked about it a bunch. It just seems like what we've been saying coming true, but is that kind of where you think you're at with it?
Yeah, I think this makes the most sense. One of my theories about it actually is that Hi-Fi Rush is the obvious pick because that game was probably done on PlayStation already.
I'm curious. You might be right. Yeah.
Because it came out so close to what am I trying to say? What's the word? So close after the deal that it was clearly a game that was almost ready, and they were able to just shadow drop it. So you'd think at the very least development work is done enough on PlayStation that this wasn't that hard of a thing to do.
Maybe. I mean, if you look at it, Ghostwire Tokyo was March of 2022, and that game did come out. So you're probably right. It was far enough along that there was at least probably a PS5 version already in development to some degree. So that's certainly an interesting one. Well, we've got a question that kind of backs up alongside this from Jehudi MD. He says, what game would you want on PlayStation from Xbox? And he further asks, what game would fit best in the PlayStation ecosystem, and what game do you think would sell the most? So we can kind of take those either as an all-in-one or kind of break down which games you think best fit each category. But starting off, what game would you want even on the PlayStation from Xbox's side?
State of Decay 2.
Okay. And that's also an online-driven game, right?
It is. Well, less so, but yeah.
but still online community, maybe not necessarily games as a service.
Yeah, exactly. You wouldn't
Yeah.
need it on PlayStation to make more money, basically.
Certainly.
At least monthly money.
I think if I'm looking at games that are on the horizon, of course, I would love for Hellblade 2 to be on PlayStation. I think that that's an obvious fit for me, and that's really just because I want to keep my ability to get the platinum for that game alive. But I think stepping back into a game that's already out and about, I actually think Sea of Thieves is the answer.
Yeah.
I often want to play Sea of Thieves, but I don't always want to have to go and because now I don't have Xbox Live. If I wanted to play it right now, I do need to play it on PC. So I don't have to use Xbox Live, or if I want to play it on my console, which is generally where I'd prefer it, then I'm going to need to pay for Xbox Live, or at this point, what they call it, was it Xbox Game Pass Core?
Yeah, I believe so.
So with those things in mind, I think that's a good fit because I do think it's a good game and a fun game. And there's a lot of people I would like to enjoy that game with who just don't have means to play it. So that's definitely one of them. I wouldn't be surprised in the same regard. It'd be way wilder, and I think they would know that, and they wouldn't make this decision as lightly, even though it was rumored at one point. I think Halo Infinite multiplayer being, because it's already a separate title anyway, but if they brought that to PlayStation, that would be pretty dang wild.
I would play that.
All right, let's shift over a little bit. What game do you think would best fit the PlayStation ecosystem?
Halo.
Why is that?
Sony doesn't have any first-person shooters.
So you think it's just yeah, but this wouldn't be first person or first party at that point, right?
No, but yeah, I mean,
it'd be competition for Apex and Call of Duty and everything on that side. So I don't think the need is immediate, even though I see where you're coming from. I think that there's.
Well, I guess at that point,
Sea of Thieves makes more sense because there's less competition in that type of game.
I mean, if we're thinking of what fits the Sony family best, isn't the answer Gears? Third-person over-the-shoulder action game?
Maybe. Still more of a shooter, but yeah, of what they have out right now, the one that most closely fits in is probably Gears.
Yeah.
I mean,
in terms of need,
I would actually love for something like Quantum Break to come over, but it's a much older title. I would actually love to see it get a second life by
Sunset
means
Overdrive.
Of coming to PlayStation. Yeah, though from everything we've seen, doesn't that seem to be in PlayStation's ball court?
Microsoft owns,
but Microsoft has the publishing rights for the title
for the first one and the next two, so that's why it's never happening.
Oh, I didn't know. I didn't see for the next two. I just saw for the first one.
Yeah.
So basically, Sony would have to buy that out,
right.
And the cost of entry would be so high. Why would they want to?
Right. Honestly, the real answer, as loath as I am to give it, because it's very fanboyish, but the answer in terms of need of what the PlayStation system needs is Starfield, Avowed, Fable, Clockwork
RPGs.
Revolution, RPGs. Yeah.
Yeah. Clockwork Revolution looks so awesome.
I cannot wait for Bioshock 5.
I wish they would have shown more gameplay instead of it just being really a fancified CG trailer. Even if it was in engine, it's still very cool vibes. But
yeah,
that's where we are. All right, and then what game do you think would sell the most? I think Starfield, if I'm being real.
Starfield, although I could see sneaky pick the Halo Master Chief Collection doing the best. Master
Chief Collection would be an interesting choice, and that was the one that was actually rumored to at one point be considered to release on PlayStation.
Yep.
If I remember right, that came from Colin of all people. So
it did. Yeah.
I think it bears good credence to think that it's probably true that they were at least considering it at one point.
Yeah.
Clearly, it didn't happen for some reason.
Yes.
So.
Yes.
Yeah. So shifting a little bit for you, since I kind of gave one that was more out and about, do you have a game on the horizon that you think would be a really good fit to be one that they move over? Be it won't happen day one, but I could see them doing what PlayStation does with PC for PlayStation. Mm-hmm. Hey, the game's going to come out. It'll have a year on Xbox and PC exclusivity. It'll be on Game Pass forever, so it'll be a big value point. But then we'll move it over. I'm not saying every game will do that, but I could see that.
Yeah. Avowed. Yeah, I think the answer is just Avowed. If we're looking at the future slate, that's the most exciting for me. Oh no, fuck that. Outer Worlds 2.
Yeah, I thought it was weird. Yeah, because I think Outer Worlds 2 is definitely Avowed looks great. I'm not trying to downplay it at all, but
Yeah, but
I
I've
think
played
it's important
Skyrim. I
throw
want
that
to
out
play
there.
the Outer Worlds too.
All right, let's keep moving on here. The next piece of news, while a firm date doesn't exist for either title, according to Sony, Metal Gear Solid Delta, which is the name for the Metal Gear Solid 3 remake, and Silent Hill 2 are both releasing in 2024, are still anticipated to. The article these were listed in does have a caveat listed that these games are expected to release in 2024. So even this is barely confirmation of a release window. What this basically means is that there's a little bit more smoke for a potential fire, but don't get your hopes up if you're in actually planning on having it be something that you are for sure going to play this year. The upside of this is it lends some credence to Chris's kind of surprise choice of Silent Hill 2 during the draft. But it's iffy enough that it's like it's better than nothing for them to talk about it again for you, but it's not enough to be like, yeah, there's still a decent chance that you may want to drop that. You know,
I'm confident in Silent Hill. Concord being named as a 2024 game a couple times was one where I'm like, thanks for the confidence. I don't believe you, but thanks.
I'd love to be wrong. And I would love to actually see, even though it doesn't feel like a Sony move, but that doesn't mean Sony has to keep doing their same moves. So that's very important to start this off with. But if PS5 Pro does come this year, like I kind of predicted, and I've seen a few other people kind of throw out there and put their hat in that ring, usually that comes with a game that is immediately on the horizon that will show that off. As we saw with Horizon Zero Dawn for the PS4 Pro. With that in mind, though, Sony has a litany of games that can see PS5 Pro benefits, like they did with a bunch of the PS4 titles going back, like Uncharted 4, and Infamous Second Son, and so on and so forth. But what I think is a little less obvious right now is what would be Sony's big, hey, this is our Sony's type game that they show right now that's going to come. And that's not immediately obvious unless it's supposed to be Concord or Fair Games. And I feel like that's a really interesting choice to try and showcase a pro system with, unless you're going to really try and speak to the core gamers where you can be like, you can play these games online with 120 frames per second so that you can have cutting edge chance of beating your opponents and blah, 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 no delay. And, it's like, that's the only way I could see that working. But I don't know that speaks to the general consumer as much as, hey, look at Uncharted 5 with its incredible 4K 60 frames per second.
Done by Sony San Diego. I actually... I don't know if Sony would have the balls to do this, but it's Sony, so they probably do have the balls to do it. Last of Us 1 plus Part 2 double pack PS5 Pro, $60. Am I crazy? Is that not a move they would do?
It's a move they would do, but I don't know if it's as immediate maybe it is. Maybe I'm not giving that as much credit as it may deserve. But it's still not a new title to be like, this is your showcase, really showing you what the PS5 Pro can do.
Yeah. If I was going to give my honest answer, I would be willing to bet this is announced with Ghost of Tsushima 2.
See, I could see that. I could see it being that, hey, it's announced and it's going to release this year, and Ghost of Tsushima 2 will be the first-party game that benefits from it, even if it doesn't come out in 2024.
But even then, I could see them walking on stage and being like, this holiday season, we're announcing Ghost of Tsushima 2 and the PS5 Pro for $700 in a pack together in November. Like, that would make a total sense. Because there's been rumors of a showcase the end of this month, next month, probably March, April, May, June, July, August, September, November, and December. There will be a PlayStation showcase. But it would make a ton of sense to be like, hey, in February, we're announcing the PS5 Pro. We're announcing our slate. Ghost of Tsushima is the end of this year. That's your holiday game. Because right now, they don't really have a holiday game.
Yeah, but I'd be really hard pressed to see them manage to get Ghost of Tsushima 2 developed and released in a 4-year window. If it not even if it released after July 17th, then it would be a 4-year window, and that just seems that's not been common. Let me say that much. I would love for that to be the case, but I'd be curious to see how possible that is. I definitely think that you're right in that it will be announced this year. It seems like a very obvious announcement, much in the same way that we got God of War Ragnarok announced, about a year and a half in advance of its release. Forbidden West, similar. Spider-Man 2, similar. So, if anything, I think Wolverine's the first example of a game that's really far out from when we first saw it.
That would actually be a good answer. Hey,
Wolverine, if it was actually ready, yeah. Sure.
November, Wolverine comes out, and so does the PS5 Pro.
Yeah.
And they show off the blood physics or whatever for no load times, and the blood looks sick.
Maybe, just maybe. All right, so we've got one more piece of news here, and it's in regards to Hogwarts Legacy. That the game that shall not be named. So, as everyone may remember, that game was. You know what? I'm just going to let Chris's version of the news go out. So, Hogwarts Legacy has cost Avada Kedavra on idiotic boycotts this year as publisher WB announces more projects for the IP are coming and announced massive sales for the game, which has topped 22 million copies sold. As of December, Hogwarts Legacy actually beat out Call of Duty, a first in many years at least, when there isn't a Rockstar Games release. Yeah, dude, 22 million in a year. I know the game came out in March, so you did get a majority of a year, but that is incredible for an IP of a game. People wanted Harry Potter games forever, and we never really got this quality and this type. And now that we finally got it, clearly there was people chomping at the bit for it. But I still find it so weird that I understand people wanted to boycott it. People wanted to give their 2 cents and say why maybe you shouldn't buy it. And all of that's fine and all of that's valid. But I think it's been pretty interesting how silenced this game was when talking about it from the award season and looking back and reflecting on the year in games. Because regardless of how you feel about whether the game should have been made and regardless of how you feel about how that 22 million copies sold reflects in some potential form of earnings for the author of the series, realistically speaking, this was the biggest game of the year, and it was treated much like in the series Voldemort is. Like, you can't talk about it, you just don't acknowledge it. But just like in the series, what happens when you don't talk about this thing? It builds power from in the shadows, and that's exactly what happened with this title.
It's not the canon reason you don't say his name, but whatever.
Oh, I know that, but I'm saying that what happens when you don't do something, when you kind of try to avoid a problem and act like it's not there, or avoid something and act like it's not there, is that doesn't mean it goes away. It just builds an army in the shadows. This is crazy. Genuinely crazy to see a game come out. And I'm so glad I went back to the game and finished it because I see the value of the IP. And I see why people were so hyped on it. I still don't think I see it in my game of the year category, but it was still just a crazy good game in a year full of other crazy good games.
Yeah, I think the thing is, like, yeah, clearly this game was othered by people and clearly people had issues with it. And whether you think they're valid or not, it doesn't. The thing with the Game Awards is that you couldn't show me one category that I think Hogwarts Legacy deserves to take home.
Yeah.
That
might be true. I don't for sure know that I agree with you there, but I feel pretty confident that I agree with you. It's like thinking
maybe
through all the
music.
Yeah, the music's pretty damn good in it.
If there was this would be a lot more conspicuous if this was any other year or if there was a best licensed game. If there was a best licensed game, this wins. But I think looking at the games this year, it would have been a travesty if it won Game of the Year. It would have been a travesty if it won Best Direction. It would have been a travesty if it won Best Writing. It would have been a travesty if it won a lot of these awards. And that is not an insult to the people who made these games or the game itself. The game itself is great. But this year had Baldur's Gate. This year had Alan Wake 2, Spider-Man, I can't even think of Super Mario Wonder, Breath of the Wild. Like, what place are you putting Hogwarts Legacy?
Yeah. Well, I'd say that the thing, and it doesn't mean that it would have won, but I thought it was pretty telling, if I'm not mistaken, that the game didn't even get to go into the, if I recall, it wasn't even a nominee choice for the Player's Voice Award. And that is something I think might have been a little more obvious for it to at least show up. Whether or not it still would have won is unlikely. I still think Baldur's Gate would have won, which it did.
What were the games nominated?
I'm actually trying to look that up right now, see if I can find it. I know that Larian won with Baldur's Gate 3. I'm less sure on how to go about looking at who the nominees were.
What was
I'm
the
sure it's
category?
somewhere. Player's Voice. And I do want to make sure that I'm looking at that correctly, but I think the Player's Voice was Baldur's Gate 3, Cyberpunk 2077, Genshin Impact, Spider-Man 2, and Tears of the Kingdom.
What game are you putting Hogwarts Legacy over there?
In this list?
Yeah.
Honestly, I think looking at the way the list is set up, I'm surprised Cyberpunk is on here. Not because of anything other than Cyberpunk didn't get talked about anywhere else besides like ongoing game. You know, because it was just more of, oh, look, it's new stuff within this. But, you know, I'm not, look, I didn't play Tears of the Kingdom. I think Genshin Impact probably is a game I'd put it over, but I've not played Genshin Impact, nor is it my type of game. So I don't want to give that type of qualitative assessment to it. But considering that 22 million people bought the game and fan voice, voicing of opinions online has been so strong, you think it would have at least ended up in this category.
Well, and I think that
because this is player's voice. This is less about, I think the other categories make more sense because if you look at them, those other categories are far more driven by the media side. And the media side is looking at some of these
fake
other
news
games.
Game media.
No, it's fake news. But my point there
Potter.
is that the other nominee spots are handled by a collection of judges that are from the games media, and it makes sense that a game like that was already a hot topic issue would have been avoided, but also in a year where so many big games that were very critically successful were there. But all of those critically successful games were outsold by Hogwarts Legacy. And so my point being, the one category where it should make obvious sense that it may show up would be something like Player's Voice. I cannot say that the fact that it wasn't there is because of some kind of silencing of it on purpose, but it is interesting to look at and go, the best-selling game of the year didn't even get talked about in Player's voice.
I think you can read that into it, or you can read these 6 games were voted on by the people who played the games, and
very, very likely so.
They bought Hogwarts and they played it and they loved it, but guess what? Cyberpunk was better. Genshin is a game.
Well, and I even want to go as far as saying this is something that we talked about a little bit. There is, very realistically, even for us and every person that you talk to, there's a recency bias. And since Hogwarts was much earlier in the year, it's going to be less talked about because a lot of games came out very close to the Game Awards that were very contentious, and people were like, oh, which one's going to win? Tears of the Kingdom, and Tears of the Kingdom came out very early as well in the year. But that's Tears of the Kingdom. It's the follow-up to Breath of the Wild, which is also like, the gaming messiah as far as people want to act like. So when you look at those things, it's a little less surprising that it's not here. But all this to say, I don't want to keep trying to do anything that implies that I know exactly what happened. It's just certainly an interesting thing to look at the best-selling game of the year to not be anywhere present in a thing where we talk about the biggest games of the year. Even just as I mentioned, someone talking about it somehow, some way, it just didn't get talked about. So it's surprising, but maybe it also goes to show you that sometimes what certain groups of people think players want is so different than what players really want. and maybe you can look at it like that,
Exactly.
In the same vein that I don't think very many people expected Elden Ring to be the first time that a Souls, technically a Souls-like, but a From Software game to immediately come out and sell 35 million.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So... that is the last piece of news, though, and we are going to go into, and Chris, unless you have something you want to add in, we're going to quickly go into one of our users submitted Velvet's Corners and wrap the show up. What do you think? Oh, actually, you know what? There's one question that I would be remiss not to get to. He went out of his way to even ask it to have not forgotten it from last week. So Stingray X comes in. He says, apologies, but I'm asking next week's question now for a bookmark so I don't forget it. What's one shadow drop you want to see in 2024? I like the question. That's why I wanted to get to it. So what's one shadow drop you'd love to see? Here's a trick on this question. No one knew Hi-Fi Rush existed before it shadow dropped, which makes answering this question really difficult. But we have seen shadow drops of other games where they've been in existence and you knew that they were in existence, but you had no clue when they were coming out. And then suddenly it's like, we just announced it, we just released it. Like we just showed it again, and here it's out now. So in any way possible, even the craziest game that you may think we'd never see, what's your shadow drop dreams for 2024?
I'm going to say the thing, Half-Life 2 Episode 3.
Half-Life 3 Episode 1.
Either way.
I'm going to give a two answers. Half-Life Alyx for PSVR 2. That would still be a shadow drop because as far as we know, there's no PSVR 2 version.
Yep.
Still blows my mind. Can't believe that didn't happen. Such low-hanging fruit. So Valve must be, clutching their pearls. No, can't have it, Towers. But my other answer is Sly 5. It'll never happen, but that's a shadow drop I want.
Yeah. Let me get Naughty Dog's Jack and Daxter, too.
I almost said that just because it's like we had that conversation. But no, if I'm being real, the game I would want to see is Sly 5 just so I can... Dude, fuck it. Sly 4 DLC. We remastered Thieves in Time. You can play it, and there's a new DLC. Do exactly what they did with Kingdoms of Amalur: Re-Reckoning, where they remastered it and released new DLC.
That would be sick.
Two Worlds 2 Game of the Year Edition PS5.
That would be pretty good too. When is Two Worlds 3 coming out? That was announced.
And then Chris, it'll be actual co-op. Unlike Chris and I had to find out the very disappointing way that Two Worlds 2 is not actually co-op.
No. It
has
weird.
A dumb co-op mode where it's like a mission that you can do with somebody else in there.
Yeah.
It is not the full game. Yeah.
Not great.
So there we have it. We got some
Hollow
other
Knight
questions.
Silk Song too.
Well, you know what? This one's quick enough. I'll throw one more in, and then we're probably going to see if I can save this next one for next week because I do like the question. TT Dog 666, another patron, longtime listener. He says it was speculated on during an admittedly Xbox podcast that Bobby Toxic, as he calls him, Bobby Kotick, will take over for Jim Ryan now that he's been booted from Activision. Thoughts? First and foremost, I doubt it. I severely doubt it. But Activision was very successful under Bobby, regardless of how you want to look at it. So it's not the stupidest thing to think that Sony would be like, well, he was very successful. But I think Sony's smart enough to not want to draw the ire of the PR that would come from that backlash, like the bad PR.
Yeah.
I think Bobby Kotick's going to retire, but it wouldn't also surprise me to see him pop up somewhere. It'd be very funny if it was a Chinese gaming company because they're like, yeah, we don't give a shit. We meet our employees too.
Right, exactly.
We also have hotel rooms with Bill Cosby.
Bobby walks in. He's like, I think we can save some money if we make the nets just a little bit shorter. We'll miss 5% of our employees jumping out of the building, but we'll save about $10,000.
So who knows? But yeah, what do you think of this? I mean, clearly, I say no, but I don't think it's without any merit to at least think through.
Here's the thing. It would be frowned upon. People would rail on Sony, and it would be an incredible move money-wise for them. Bobby Kotick makes money.
Strong, but he does make money. Here's the crazy thing, though. I'd be curious to see how Bobby Kotick's very clear tactics, some of which have been recently criticized, as people have been able to be kind of open and talking about it, since they know he's out too. I guess there's less fear of repercussion. But, you kind of made a joke in the Discord of great Yearly Horizon and The Last of Us because they're big sellers, right? And add God of War to that list and all that stuff. Well, here's the thing. Bobby Kotick's primary way of making money for Activision was on the back of a singular franchise that you just beat into the ground by having it released yearly. Do you think that Sony wants to allow all of the goodwill and public image they've built around making the highest quality games turn into all of their studios only making the same franchise every year and still getting to spend 4 or 5 years on it, but only going towards a couple of franchises. I don't know that they'd do that, and it would be a really weird use of their IP, and they would honestly have to grow even more to have the studios necessary to put out the content to make something like that, if you really want to look at what Bobby's already familiar at making. That doesn't mean he can't come in and find ways to somehow adapt PlayStation's existing, I guess what their identity is, as well as what their market is, with the market they're trying to form with their games as a service. But I don't think it's immediately obvious that he would be a net benefit if you take all of the PR hit out of it, even,
I wouldn't want him there. I wouldn't want to hear about it, but I do think maybe incredible is not the right word, but it would be a savvy enough play where I'm like, I see what you're doing here. I don't think it's going to be anyone like Bobby. I wouldn't even be surprised at this point if it's Herman Holst, but we'll have to see. It wouldn't shock me if it's, hey, Druckmann's been promoted to head of PlayStation, or Barlog, or one of those people, or I don't know. And then Herman takes over. It's not going to be Bobby Kotick, but I think I said it on this show, and I'm not the only person who said it. Bobby Kotick should be taking over Xbox right now, but he's not. And again, this is all in terms of making money. We're not talking... My comment on that is not thinking about workers' health and happiness. It's not thinking about the health of the games. It's thinking about what's best for the company. And if what's best for the company is to make money, Bobby Kotick has a proven track record of buying Activision for $500,000 and selling it for $69 billion.
Well, and it's really weird because one thing that happens is that even people who may be net negatives for the industry and net negatives for all sorts of things, if you want to look at them that way, or even if you just want to look at them as negatives for the way that you like to view the games industry or whatever industry you're in, music industry, whatever it is. I think I'd be remiss to act like Activision has done absolutely nothing I've liked since Bobby Kotick has been running them. He's been running them for a long time. And they've done a lot of great things that I very much enjoyed. They made the Transformers games, the Cybertron games, which were excellent, and some of my favorite games from that generation, licensed or not. They are part of the reason that we got the Crash Insane trilogy and Crash Bandicoot 4, both incredibly good games that seem almost antithetical to what Activision primarily does. We got the Spyro Reignited trilogy, which also seems kind of antithetical to what Activision does. Yep. Not only the fact that the games even existed, but that they had no real way to be monetized. And even though they had no real way to be further monetized, you got 3 games for $60, which is something that Sony even refuses to do. So I think when you look at them, you got to look and say that, yeah, Bobby Kotick is problematic in a million ways, but I can't sit there and act like Activision under his rule is entirely wrong or entirely bad. I got Diablo 3 from that. Diablo 4 was still a great time, even if it didn't stick with me as long as Diablo 3 did. There are good times to be had from Activision products that were made directly under his supervision, or at least his structured company. So as easy as it is to want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, I got to look at it and go, well, there was great things that came out of that at the cost, admittedly, from what we can tell, of a lot of other things that are not something that we want to look at as consumers. We do want to look at and be like, well, how are people being treated? What is it like? Or is it a good place to work? But Chris makes a good point. Realistically, when you're in a publicly held company, they just want to see dollars and cents. And as long as they can still keep making dollars and cents, even if you cause some splashes, if it doesn't completely hurt your bottom line, they're willing to put up with some of it. It does seem that Bobby finally hit the point of his line of how much beneficial he was to the company to how much of a hit he was to the company from a PR standpoint started to kind of hit a point of no return. Otherwise, I don't think Activision would have been so gung-ho to sell, from being honest. So if you look at it that way, I wouldn't be surprised if he never turns up in the industry again, but I also wouldn't be surprised if someone goes, clearly he has some know-how. It's just... what kind of ropes can you put on Bobby to try and control him while still getting the beneficial aspects of him? Because the sad reality is there are some redeemable aspects to his leadership that, in terms of a value, doesn't mean that the net value is what you want, but there is some value there. So can you mine that value out while trying to restrain the negative qualities? And does someone even want to put up with that? Does Bobby want to put up with that?
Yeah.
You know?
I mean, I think the hard question there is, do they care if Bobby's making money? Because Activision didn't care for 30 years. And then Me Too happened, which nobody's sitting here saying that's a bad thing. But Bobby Kotick got exposed, and now he's out of Activision. I don't know that happens in another scenario. So,
yeah.
It's interesting.
Yeah, exactly. So, who knows? Interesting thought process, though. I think it is interesting to say that someone said it during an Xbox podcast. I don't think that this is something that people would be looking at as any kind of real rumor or even thought process. Not that it's impossible, but it just is what it is. So with that in mind, Chris is sending me Tales of Xillia. Tales of Xillia PlayStation 3 console.
Dude, I was looking at
Holy shit, that is beautiful. I've never seen this.
Dude, I'm gonna buy it when I get paid. That's what I'm buying.
Wow, that is gorgeous.
I was gonna get the Metal Gear one, but I'm getting that Tales of Xillia one.
Man, if you want to see it, it's a PS3 Slim, so it's the middle one that a lot of people view as their favorite. And the PS3 embossment has got a red gloss in it, and then the picture has got the main characters that you can play as in Xillia, and it's got this cool whipping of like flowers coming. That is beautiful. You should look it up if you've never seen it. That's insane. There's some pretty cool PS3s.
Yep, this is Japan. I don't know if it's Japan.
Still highly disappointed in PS5's console output for anything remotely interesting.
Give me more plates.
Oh, and even if we get plates now, they're just going to be for the smaller PlayStation that just came out.
I was thinking about that same thing. When they showed the CES plates, I'm like, does that mean I don't get plates?
Yeah.
Where are my plates? That's fucked.
You had 3 years and they gave you like four colors and one game.
I mean, I shouldn't talk. My PS5 is blue. That's my PS5.
And they didn't even do the same thing that they did for Spider-Man why was there not Ragnarok plates? Like, come the fuck on, guys.
Well, there was a controller there was also a Spider-Man
that's what I mean. So why not? Sense. Yeah, it's like, why not do it match? But that's okay. All right, moving on. If you ask some questions, we're going to try and get to them next episode if we can. We're going to do a quick Velvet's Corner, and then we got one more in the bank right now. So if you have any that you've had on mind, go ahead and feel free to send them to us, be in the Discord, through email, any way that you see fit. If you have a question about what you want to send or where to send it, feel free to DM us, message me, message Chris, whoever. We'll try and get you on that. But this week's, before the last one that we have in there, is pretty simple, and it also comes from Stingray X. He says, it's like he gave it... Hold on. First of all, what am I doing here? It's Velvet's Corner time. This is the sexiest part of the show, Chris, and you know what that means, right?
I do.
Time to edge you. Velvet's Corner. Fine, I'll just go in and add a...
It just needs an ending, Brett. God, you're like Stephen King. You can't finish.
Yeah, it's okay. I'm pretty sure you made that joke before.
I don't know if I use Stephen King, but...
Yeah. Well, Chris, it's like your mom. I can't finish. No, I'm kidding. Mrs. Figueroa, please. I was joking. It was an internet. It was for the internet clout. Forgive me.
Be more worried about my dad.
Mr. Figueroa, I'm sorry. Please do not consider taking away my Longhorn gift cards. The possibility for them. I apologize. I made a severe and continual lapse in judgment. All right, Chris. Now that we've got that out of the way, Stingray decided with his Velvet's submission to give, it's almost like a segment intro, Velvet's Video Games Rockin' Corner with Triangle Square, the PlayStation podcast. Only on 103.9.
Not your dad's rock.
I'm 6 feet.
Radioactive. Radio.
Listen, it's not a hit on Creed. I love Creed. I just want to throw it out there. Yeah,
I can take you higher.
All right, Chris. Here goes this week's strain. So instead of, we're moving away from a game and going a little bit more towards the early days where it's a little prompt and kind of for us to mess around with and see what we think about. He says, puberty hits. You're both 14, waking up having Kratos' Blades of Chaos for hands. Hold on. Chains included. God of War franchise doesn't exist in this universe. What will your reaction be, and how did you manage in life until the age you are now? So from 14 to 30 for me, and 14 to 31 for you?
Correct.
All right, Chris. So first thing that we have to figure out here, do we have the Blades of Chaos for hands, or do we have Blades of Chaos around our hands?
I didn't think about that.
Do I still have my hands, or have they been replaced with like, you ever see Billy and Mandy, Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy?
Yeah.
You know Hans Delgado, how he's got like the hand that he can like take off, and he's got like the chainsaw attachment and stuff.
Yeah.
Is that what's going on? Do I like, instead of a hand, is it just like suddenly a blade? If so, why do the chains come into play? Are they just there to piss me off?
I think so.
But this is important, because I'm going to tell you something about puberty, guys.
Are you?
In puberty, your hand finds its way into your pants far too often.
Jesus
and if you have
Christ.
a blade for a hand,
what the fuck, man?
what do you even do? Do you just go fuck the couch cushions?
You just hold the blades together and just slowly
On the blunt edge?
Yeah.
With a little bit of lube?
Right. Exactly. You fuck the blades. My assumption, I'm just going to go with, because it makes this easier, is that I am just Kratos.
But you don't know of Kratos as a character. God of War doesn't exist.
Right.
But you are effectively Kratos. You have chains wrapped around your arm. Is your skin white as shit too?
Well,
and you have no clue why? You're just ashy?
I mean, I guess so. I would say I'm ashy.
Okay.
Putting on white face.
Chris, that's offensive.
Oh, I'm Puerto Rican, so it's fine. I mean, listen, first of all, I'd be sick at my job, right? Because I would just be like, oh, I need to julienne some onions. And I'm done. Well, no, that wouldn't be very serve safe, because there's probably blood all over the blades, right? If they're Kratos' blades, they're soaked in blood.
Well, maybe not, right? Let's just say there were fresh blades that you got given that never been used prior to you waking up with them 14.
So these are just
but there's still probably blood all over them.
Knives.
What happens when you're sleeping? Are you just like fucking...
Right, exactly.
Like cutting your face because you go to scratch yourself because at 14 you lost 14 years of like of your body being like, if you need to scratch, you use your hand, and then you just pull a blade up to your face, slice your eyebrow off. How many stitches have you had?
Thousands.
How many times? How do you piss? Do you have a catheter for life?
No, you have hands.
Oh, okay, so we're moving away from. Okay, I got you. I thought you were saying that your hands are the blades still, but no, we're saying we're Kratos. Yeah, you're right.
I'm saying we're Kratos.
Yeah, so you have hands. We're good. But eventually, somehow, you're going to cut yourself, right?
I can piss and come fine.
There's a quote for some future version of Quotal Recall.
I'm talking about God of War 3.
Wait, when you fuck Aphrodite?
Yes, absolutely. No, I feel like it wouldn't change my life all that much, right? Like, I feel like the real question that we're not getting answered here is, am I still a god? Because if I'm still a god...
And do you even understand why you have them? But if the franchise doesn't exist, is it still that Ares is like, hey, fuck you, I gave you these, you owe me. And until you pay me back, you'll have them forever.
Yeah, you got to pay like a 6% interest loan on your
So it's Tales of Xillia 2.
Yeah, exactly.
Hey man, we noticed that you're about to get a job promotion, but until you pay $10,000 on your loan payment against the Blades of Chaos that I forced upon you, I'm not going to let you get that promotion.
So here's a philosophical question.
Okay, good. I love philosophy. Let's go.
If I was a god, right? Like, I feel like humans inherently want to say they would do good, right? If you had superpowers.
Sure.
But would you?
I think I would.
If you were Kratos, you could just take over the country.
Oh, 100%. Well, here's the thing, right, Chris? I think if I'm looking at myself, right, I think I would do more good than I would negative. But I think if we're being inherent to the fact that humans are flawed and we make mistakes, if I have chains wrapped around my arms with blades that I have to carry around and someone pisses me off, the chances that one time I'm going to do something go pretty high. Right.
And then at that point,
it's a matter of interactions. Like eventually they're going to catch you on the wrong time and it's going to be like that Joker, one bad day.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Yeah. And that's the thing, right? I could be a benevolent leader, a great leader. But what happens when, there's a protest outside the White House? Do you know what I mean? Like, am I just out there like 100 combo,
and throwing them onto the spikes of the fence?
Right, exactly. Just out there, just grabbing protesters, just ripping them by the jaws. And like,
how do you think you'd win this election? Are you saying that you take it? Like, the presidency becomes a dictatorship?
You don't have to win an election. Right,
so
I feel like
you ruin the country because you just want ultimate power.
I'm not saying I would. I'm asking the question: if a normal human being wakes up with that much power, right? And like, it depends on your life.
Well, that's important. Like you said, if you're not a god, if you just have these chains and these blades, but you are not muscly, like if we're going off of our world's rules, if you're not physically fit enough to deal with this shit, does the next 16 years of my life involve me getting slowly ripped over time because I have to drag around chains and blades constantly?
You would have a rough year, but then you'd just be strong enough to carry the blades.
Yeah. Do I get this is an important thing, and I know you're in your philosophy, but this is very important to me. You know how in the games, even though the blades are supposed to be attached to Kratos' chains and arms, but he can just conveniently disconnect them from the chains and put them on his back?
Yes.
Which seems physically impossible if they're supposed to be permanently attached. Which also goes to tell you, how the fuck did he get them off of him in God of War 2018? We're just not going to talk about that. He could have you're telling me he just took them off and put them under the floorboards? He could have done that all through God of War 1 through 3? Can I take these bitches off?
I would be willing to bet the bullshit answer from Cory Barlog would be when he crossed into a new realm, the magic from the Greek world faded and he was able to take off the blades.
Well, then why was he able to find them and pick them up and use them in God of War 2018? See what I'm saying?
Because he's fucking Kratos, dog. That's why.
He's like, fuck the boundaries. I am a god.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But do you understand what I'm saying, right? You would have to wrestle with having, for all intents and purposes, unlimited power. Because even if you didn't usurp power, right? This is always a question with comic books. Why is Spider-Man poor? When he could just put on a different outfit and walk into a bank vault one time.
Oh, it's Jumper, right? It's Jumper all over again.
Right.
It's like you have this power to just blink into something and he's like, fuck it, I'm just going to blink into this bank.
Like, I can tell you I didn't hurt anybody in this process. Tell you right now, if I have Kratos' power, I'm not poor. I'm telling you I'm not poor. I'm not telling you how I get the money because I don't know. But I'm telling you that I am not poor.
Oh, dude, you just grandstand on the side of the road. You just fucking move to LA or fucking California and you just start doing juggling the blades of chaos or,
No, I'm not going to be a street performer when I have godlike power. I'm going to walk into the Federal Reserve. They're going to shoot me a bunch, see that it does nothing. I'm going to be like, I'm going to take $50 million.
Sure.
And by taking this money, I agree to not become a criminal villain. But I'm just going to be set for it. No, this is a bartering arrangement. They see that Chris, I have ultimate power.
But why do you even need to do that, right? Because if you have ultimate power, money's pointless. You don't even need money. Your currency is the threat that you'll kill someone and that they can't kill you. So you don't even need the money. You skip a step. You walk into a house you want and you go, this is mine, leave or you'll fucking face the consequences. And then go, oh, okay. And then you go to the store when you're hungry and you go, or you go to okay, look, you go to Longhorn, right? Mm-hmm. your dad comes to you, he's like, son, hi, yeah, and then he tries to, you're like, hey, I want my outlaw ribeye, and he brings it to you, and you eat, and you're like, that was delicious, and then he brings you the check, and he's like, hey, you guys pay it when you're ready, no rush, and then you go, I'll pay this when I'm ready, and you pull out your blade of chaos, and you're like, I'll fucking, if you don't want to see what I'm gonna do with this, Mr. Figaro, I mean, Dad.
But that is straight up evil. That becomes supervillain territory.
So how is walking in and threatening and stealing everyone's money in the treasury not the same thing?
It all depends on perspective. I'm not threatening. I'm not threatening to kill anyone.
They're paying you off.
I'm promising not to murder.
You're threatening. You're threatening them to bribe you.
Yes.
You're convincing them to bribe you, so under threat.
Okay.
That you will become worse if you do not get bribed. Chris, that is not good.
It's better than
if we're
walking
talking
into
about
fucking
philosophy,
Subway and being like,
look, you are correct.
You're 16. I will cut your fucking head off if you don't
Chris,
give
you
me
already
a foot
did
long
that.
Philly.
All you did was make him pay for your sandwich for you. You understand this.
Yeah, but I didn't threaten him. I would have walked away without.
Did you ever go back?
Oh, fuck.
Did you ever go back?
I never went back. I'll tell you, I'll probably never go to that Subway again. But
well, look, Chris. We were talking about philosophy. And, in this philosophy, I'm going to break it down. Are we trying to maximize or minimize human suffering, right?
Right.
And I think what I would tell you is if I had this power, and I think a good majority of humans would try to minimize suffering. Now, you might be arguably correct that you would be minimizing suffering by going into an area and be like, hey, give me this much money. I won't become a threat. But all you're really doing is minimizing suffering by way of bribery. And in a way, there's an argument to be made that you might be maximizing the suffering of certain groups of people by taking money from the treasury, if not outright taking money from the treasury, meaning that they have to replace that money by printing more into currency, which therefore lowers the value of the dollar, which therefore makes everyone suffer more. So I think if we're trying to get out of this with some kind of theological grandstand of how you're going to get around to being a good person by not being a bad person, I don't think you're going to get there.
Is it just do you just Iron Man it?
See, it's funny that you bring up Iron Man, right? Because I actually used to have this conversation with my friends. We'd be like, listen, there's a group of people in your life. The younger you are, the more prevalent it is. I'd say right now I don't have that list. I used to say I had a list of people that were kind of like, I don't like enough that the question was, if I ever got, like if I woke up one day and had 24 hours in an Iron Man suit, would I hurt them or would I be able to control myself to be like, even though I have this power, I'm not going to use it to deal with my enemies and people that I don't like. You know what I mean? This is literally conversations we had when we were 17, 18, when we moved out on our own.
Well, I don't think you, here's the thing, right? What I meant by Iron Manning it is, do I just go like current events, right? If I woke up tomorrow with the Blades of Chaos, do I just walk into Israel and Palestine and just be like, this is done? Right? Is that what I do?
Well, Chris, you're starting to get into a very deep territory because just walking over there and saying it's done doesn't mean anything, right? You can say it's done, but all they're going to do is stop fighting in the meantime, but it doesn't resolve the issues that they are fighting over, right? All you do is scare them apart from wanting to fight each other. Is that a net positive? Maybe.
Well, yeah, I would think.
To some people, probably not. You know?
Right. But then do you just take them and you're like, okay, we're hashing this out. Nobody leaves. You know? Because you have the power. Because I'm thinking of it in sense of like, in Iron Man 1, he goes into, unidentified Middle Eastern territory, kills a bunch of terrorists, and then Iron Man 2, it's privatized world peace. You're welcome. You know what I mean? Is that the goal for you? So you just stop the Israel-Palestine crisis. You go up to Putin and you're like, dog, pull out. Go home. Is that what you do with the power? And then you go to like the US military and you go to all these militaries and you're like, you can't take me on. We're done with war.
Yeah, because you're headstrong to take on anyone. Sorry.
Like, do you get where I'm coming from, right? Do you just exert so much power that you're like, I'm an asset for the world. The UN is going to pay my bills. And you want to start shit? It's done. I'm going to jump in and I'm just going to Blades of Chaos your tanks.
How sick of a moment would it be that someone launches a nuke and while it's in air, you just fucking throw your chain up and slice it in half?
It's just as it's falling, there's a giant flaming circle above it, and it's just
oh, that's so ridiculous. Listen, clearly, I'm gonna take this so far back, Chris, and let's just answer it at genuine face value. You wake up, nothing about you is different at all, except for the fact that you have chains and blades bolted into your arms. That's it. You're not a god. You are the same person, same fallible person. You can still die. You still do everything, but you live your life from 14 years old to 31 years old. How? Well, A, what was your reaction to waking up this way?
Sick.
And then B, and again, you had no clue that God of War exists. You just wake up with. Do you not think you'd wake up in like a Saw movie where like you'd be like, "What the fuck is this?"
Corey Barlog walks in. He's like, "Want to play a game?"
That's actually a good parody. Is having Jigsaw pick up Kratos and put the blades into his arm.
Yeah.
And then Kratos passes his tests, and now he uses those blades as a strength. Anyway, going back. I'll do my fan my
Maybe
fan
you should
creations
run
later.
PlayStation. That is brand synergy if I've ever heard it.
And okay, so you don't know any of that, but point being, you have that waking up. You're not going to be like. Part of me thinks I'd be like sick, but part of me would also be like, "What the fuck?" Like,
I would definitely be scared. I think the question becomes if you're just a regular dude.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, the fact that these just appear imply the world is magical. Okay, I want to be clear about that. There is no escaping that there is some force in this world.
Well, yeah, but that could also just be like the Christian God, right?
Could
At
be.
that point, realistically.
Then I got to fight that
worldview.
motherfucker to get these off my hands. I think
so. With that viewpoint in mind, yeah, it's like you're right. The fact that it happened overnight, if you couldn't find any evidence that suggested someone broke in and did this, and of course you'd be like, how did this happen without me waking up? It's so unlikely for it to have been anything surgical. There's no scars. There's no anything. There's just suddenly bolts in my arm and chains wrapped around it and blades, right? So if you're looking at that, you're right. It does point toward the existence of something higher.
Mm-hmm.
So do you suddenly become religious?
Yeah. I would think you'd have to.
Do you curse the God that you think had to have given this to you because you view it as a curse?
It'd probably be the second one. But the question we're not thinking of, right, is you wouldn't be allowed to go to school.
Well, see, I was about to say, how did you manage in life until you get there? So I'm glad you went there because my thought was school, education. You're suddenly homeschooled, right? You're homeschooled. That's it.
100%.
You're probably not going to get into very many curricular activities, like extracurricular activities.
No, you can't play football. You can't play baseball. How are you going to catch the ball? You're going to cut it in half?
Yeah, exactly. So you go through there. What does a job interview look like?
Depends on the industry. If I was a chef and you had knives attached to your arms, I'd be like, fuck, all right. Wash them.
Can you clean them?
Can you run them through the dishwasher?
Sanitized? All right. That's fair. Here's the big question. How difficult do you think that having these knives as hands, right? We're both heterosexual men. Yeah. So let's look at it through that viewpoint, right? Do you think having these blades attached to you and these chains and everything on there, do you think that would be a boon or a bust to your ability to pick up women? And more importantly, if it is a boon, do you think it would only be a boon insofar as you can pick up surface level, relationships where you just bang a chick and then she leaves you, very God of War-esque like, because she doesn't really want to be with someone with these are for hands? Or do you think you might actually be able to get your way into being like finding someone that you care for and love and want to make a family with?
I think the problem is that if you have knives attached to your arms and a girl wants you for that, you're worried about being killed in your sleep by said woman.
Oh yeah, it's contingent, right? It's contingent on this part of you that. Yeah, right. I got you.
Like that's a crazy bitch. And that's cool, but I don't know how you
the crazy hot scale, right?
Right, exactly. I think that's the worry, right? I don't think there's any. Well, again, you have hands, and you would think by the time you're getting married, you have control of where the blades go.
To some degree, you've 3D printed like upper arm things where you can like rest them in there or something, right? Sheaths.
And if you find a woman who loves you for you, she'll know where to put her hands when you're getting intimate to not cut herself.
Sure, you know. Again, there's no reason to think that you couldn't sheathe the blades to where they're not a danger. I have to be
abundantly honest. I feel like this wouldn't affect your life very much at all. Other than the fact that you do have to be homeschooled and you can't fucking fly in a plane.
Yeah, that's true.
Like
you probably can't ride on a bus either. You're doing private. You're traveling everywhere.
You could ride a bus with like long sleeve shirt.
Those blades are pretty fucking big.
It's like covering your tattoos.
I wonder how reasonable it would actually be to have the bolt there and have the chain. Like if you're wearing like a long sleeve, like a very puffy long sleeve, could you put the chain up your arms and actually put them on your back, and then just put a jacket over that to hide it all? Like you probably look a little weird,
blades
but, you know.
down. Yeah, I mean, you look like fucking Lou Ferrigno, but.
Look at this guy, fucking swole as shit on the back.
Oh, it's the fucking Hulk over there. What you doing? Yeah, I feel like it honestly wouldn't be all that crazy. Like you'd have to have a very specific job. You'd have to be a performer or like a dominatrix or something along those lines, or a chef. But you couldn't work at fucking Etna. You know what I mean? Like typing in.
You're a car salesman,
right? You could. I could see it.
Yeah.
You'd be like, "Oh, these cup holders are very practical. They hold my blades.
they're very roomy."
Yeah. Oh yeah. It's got great leather seats. They don't cut at all.
Okay. Final question for you, Chris.
Final question for me.
Yeah, we can both answer this. In this scenario, do you think your offspring?
Thank you, Grandpa.
Do you think your offspring come out with little blades? And they're like horse hooves? Because I don't know if you know this, but like baby horses are born with their hooves already. But because a hoof inside of the mother's womb would hurt them if they were hard like a real hoof is, instead they're soft in the womb. And as soon as they come out, over the next few hours, they harden up almost immediately, because of being out and exposed to the air. So would the little babies come out with little soft blades that react to the air around them and start to...
But at that point, you're basically saying that I am the next evolution of human beings. And we've evolved to have utensils on our hands, which is a scary indictment of the United States of America.
And then the question becomes, if that is the evolution, how long until the evolution is just everyone being Baraka? You know what I mean? Like that goes back to what we talked about. Like the blades are your hands, kind of. And like Baraka still has hands, but you can't do shit with those blades.
Yeah, You're not shaking hands on with that.
And then again, how long until we eventually get a mutation that leads to someone having blades that are not only part of their arm like Baraka, but are also completely retractable, a la Wolverine? Even though I think Baraka also sometimes can retract his.
I mean, you would think eventually we just become the high on life weapons.
Oh yeah, there you have it.
Know.
Well, there you go, Stingray. That's the answer to your burning question, and this has been another successful Velvet's Corner. Velvet's Corner. All right, Chris, thank you for joining me for yet another episode. This has been a wild, weird, ridiculous ride, but I hope you guys enjoyed it. Once more, if you're new to the show and you liked what you had here, spread the word, let other people know about us. And if you can, rate and review the show. If you're watching on YouTube, consider subscribing and sharing the video with anyone else that you think might like it, as well as chatting with us down in the comments over anything that you had to say. Chris, what do you think this week's community stake should be?
Which Xbox game are you most excited to get a platinum trophy in?
Okay, I like that one. We'll run with it. All right, guys. As always, we want to thank everyone for listening to the show, and we want to specifically shout out our patrons who give as little as $1 per month to support the show with more than just their time, which we are always so thankful for. So because of them, the show is allowed to happen without us having to dig into our own time or without having to dig into our own pockets to cover the expenses. So equipment, cost to cover the show, hosting, and all that is covered by you. So as we basically are saying, the show is brought to you by you. And if it wasn't for you, it probably wouldn't be happening. So we would like to shout out all of our patrons as we do at the end of every episode. And we are going to start that off by shouting out Duh Overlord, Spencer, Brandon Edwards, Alex, Barry Rogers, Stingray X, Easton328, Aztec King, Lecheon69, The Lord Corgi, Bailey Robertson, Mark Schutz, Cypher Primus, Kyle Grimm, Rude Days 93, Kevin Bacon Bits, Danny Villiobos, Jehudi MD, No Fate, Josh Ayers, Derek Porter, Donovan Williams, Matthew Green, and Sean Sanderud. Thanks to each and every one of you. We'll see you next week.